Chapter 481, Esdeath embarks on her journey. They never expected Bran to return, so they hadn't fled, and now they were caught off guard. Bran's body swelled to twice its normal size, his towering, ferocious form like a demon descending from the heavens. Ernest's eyes widened in terror. "Shira, look at that!" Before he could finish, Bran snatched him by the head and hurled him aside. With a shred of sanity still clinging to him, Bran decided to drag Ernest before the Empire's courts and let imperial justice take its course. The four Rakshasa ghosts, terrified of death, threw down their weapons and surrendered. Bran said nothing to dissuade them. He knew that hope would only make their eventual execution all the more agonizing. By the time the dust settled, the battle had been won on two fronts. The Royal Knights and the Assassination Corps had neutralized the Revolutionary Army's Imperial Weapons Strike Team, and Esdeath's forces finally arrived in the north. As Esdeath's banners fluttered into view, the northern garrisons erupted in cheers, rushing from their camps to welcome her triumphant return. "General Esdeath! No, Her Majesty Esdeath! Queen Esdeath!" The cheers swelled until they nearly shook the tent poles, but Esdeath only smiled, utterly at ease among her soldiers. Her warmth and openness, the same she'd always shown them, only fueled their excitement. They weren't just any unit, they were the Northern Legion, and this was their leader. Even if she sat on the throne, she'd never abandon them. Esdeath raised a hand, calling for silence. "Report, what is the status of the Northern Tribe's fortifications?" A deputy Legion commander stepped forward. In the Northern Legion, each deputy oversaw 10,000 men. Today, he spoke for them all. "My general, the tribes have completed several defensive lines. Here in the north, fortifications are built by nightfall. Water the ground, and by morning you have an ice wall, thick, resilient, and not easily melted. They've even embedded stone to reinforce it. It's a formidable barrier." He paused, meeting Esdeath's gaze. "They intend to wear us down, hoping our supply lines will buckle under their defenses, but they underestimate our strength and our resolve." Esdeath nodded, eyes gleaming. "Very well. We'll show them that no wall, ice, stone, or otherwise, can stand against the Northern Legion." She turned to face her officers, voice steady and low. "Prepare the assault. At dawn, we strike." The commanders exchanged determined glances, then saluted. Outside the tent, the wind howled over icy ramparts. Within them, the thunder of the Legion's heartbeats rose in unison, ready to shatter every obstacle before them. Even if the Imperial Army managed to break through the frontline defenses, they still had to face Numisaka, the North's master warrior, in a deliberate positional battle. On paper, their tactics and strategy were sound. Their one fatal oversight was underestimating Esdeath. "Build a defensive line?" Esdeath's lips curved into a sneer. Without another word, she strode forward and unleashed a surge of supernatural cold that ripped through the northern ice fields. If the air had already hovered just below freezing, this new blast drove temperatures down to levels no human or even the fiercest beasts could withstand. The tribal soldiers perched atop the ramparts barely had time to register the drop in temperature before the frost seeped into their flesh, encasing them in crystalline prisons. Their bodies stiffened and shattered from the inside out. Even if they were somehow thawed, they would be dead beyond revival. Esdeath allowed no respite. With a flick of her wrist, the living statues exploded into shards of ice. Wherever her army advanced, resistance simply dissolved, as though the land itself had emptied before her. Ethan didn't receive the startling news until they arrived at the gates of the northern fortress city. Standing before those massive walls, he could scarcely believe it. Thousands of troops had been arrayed along each defensive line. No matter how brilliant General Esdeath's tactics, no mortal force could have been routed so swiftly, unless, of course, you wielded ice like a god. What Ethan didn't yet know was that Esdeath had deliberately restrained herself. Had she wished only to destroy, she would have obliterated every defender the moment they stepped into the frigid wind. Instead, she chose to push her new recruits to the limit, testing their endurance and resolve. The Imperial Army's march had been merciless. Day after day, tens of thousands of soldiers trudged northward without encountering a single hostile blade, and still, the losses were catastrophic. Most of the men hailed from the warm southern provinces and were utterly unprepared for the tundra's savage cold. Scores of them simply froze on the march, their bodies swallowed by the endless white. It was a grim mirror of Esdeath's previous southern campaign, when tropical jungles had claimed countless lives through poisonous insects and snakes. In both realms, north or south, her troops paid the price for stepping beyond their limits. Esdeath had settled into a grim, methodical routine, launching balanced offensive and defensive operations under the guise of troop training, while ruthlessly stamping out the wars and uprisings that flared across the Empire. She'd sworn not to strike the final, war-ending blow until enemy casualties reached her chosen threshold, and that moment was fast approaching. Ethan stretched luxuriously, letting the sun's rays warm his skin. 100 days of deliberate exposure had fueled the super evolution coursing through his veins. Esdeath's campaign, he knew, was almost over, but whether she'd choose to follow him afterward was another matter entirely. He didn't mind either way. If she stayed behind, she'd simply be a beautiful prize locked in a golden cage, one he could claim whenever he wished. After all, when he first encountered Esdeath, she'd already made her reputation. She'd hung Numaseika's severed head on the Empire's northern frontier, then buried 400,000 tribespeople alive. In under 24 hours, she'd ended that entire war. Neither the Revolutionary Army nor the legendary male Susanoo, wielding the Empire's finest weapons before Nageshitan's rise, had been able to withstand her. Now, as the day of reckoning drew near, Ethan braced himself for what would come, regardless of whether Esdeath stood at his side or remained on the battlefield. Esdeath had already mastered the Mahabodham technique, and she could unleash it several times a day. Susanoo, still stuck in his original form, wasn't a real contender. With disdain for his meager power, she simply encased him in ice and shattered him into slag. The Revolutionary Army reeled from the loss and slipped into hiding, but it was too late for them to regroup. Ethan's Special Royal Knights unit had already been activated. He'd handpicked the most telepathically gifted veterans from the old army and elevated them to knighthood. Operating in small detachments, these Royal Knights were stationed across the Empire's major cities and would soon be dispatched to every town and village, ensuring the Crown's rule was absolute. Even if the revolutionaries tried to stir up trouble, they'd find themselves completely contained. "My lord," Esdeath said quietly, "are you planning to leave this world?" Ethan looked at her thoughtfully. "What do you think?" he asked. "Do you wish to come with me? Or would you rather stay here and continue reigning as queen? You've transcended into a dangerous humanoid species. You no longer age, and your lifespan is effectively limitless." Ethan leaned back, a confident smile playing at the corner of his mouth. "Ruling as an emperor for 1,000 years? That's more than enough." He turned his gaze toward the horizon, where the world of One Punch Man awaited him. Even if Esdeath managed to cross over to that universe, at best she'd reach the upper dragon tier. She wouldn't even match the surface-cleaning dragon-level fighters there. Esdeath's cool blue eyes fixed on him. "Are there really that many powerful people in other worlds?" she asked plainly. Ethan nodded. "More than you can imagine. None of them surpass your master, of course, but they all outclass you." He gave her a playful, knowing grin. "So, what are you waiting for?" Esdeath's lips curved into a genuine laugh. "Lead the way, Emperor." Together, they turned toward the shining portal that would carry them to their next adventure. Chapter 482, Esdeath's First Battle. Esdeath stood alone on the rampart's icy parapet, her breath crystallizing in the chill air. As military minister to the Millennium Queen, she'd mastered every battlefield tactic. Yet now, gazing out over this strange new world, she felt a pang of loneliness. Absolute authority in her own realm had meant no rivals, no challengers, and she admitted for the first time a crushing isolation. "How I wish I could journey to countless worlds," she murmured to herself. "Countless heroes, countless foes to test my strength." A soft voice answered from behind. "If anyone can turn worlds into her playground, it's you, Esdeath." She turned to find Ethan, formerly known as Luther, leaning casually against the stony battlement. As Minister of Revenues, he handled the realm's coffers and provisions. Now he'd assumed the role of her master's chief advisor. His eyes, honed by superhuman vision, betrayed no surprise at her confession. Esdeath sheathed her frost blade and swept forward, wrapping her arms around him in an uncharacteristic hug. Ethan, I never imagined a land so full of promise. Imagine, the crystals glowing in that eastern valley, the volcanic forges of the north. I owe all this wonder to you. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. You've earned every marvel here. But tell me, what do you propose for our first great campaign? Esdeath straightened, her pale hair catching the moonlight. Leave that to me. I'll marshal the legions, breach the enemy's lines, and... In that case, Ethan interrupted with a faint smile, I'll ensure the treasury supports you. Supplies, reinforcements, even war machines. You name it. She grinned, eyes gleaming with ambition. Perfect. And when the dust settles, you'll see that I alone can decide the battlefield's fate. Ethan's gaze was steady. He'd felt each of her fiery gambits before she even voiced them, her love of risk, her addiction to that edge between victory and ruin. To her, losing was just another way to learn. But he understood her too well, and he wouldn't be swayed by theatrics. For this campaign, he said, I want precise logistics, troop movements mapped, supply lines charted. No surprises. Esdeath's smile faltered ever so slightly. No surprises? She echoed. He nodded. Every queen needs a disciplined minister of revenue. She laughed, the sound like wind chimes in an ice storm. I suppose even the Millennium Queen must balance glory with accounting. As they leaned on the parapet side by side, Ethan noticed something new in her posture, a streak of uncertainty. Behind her bravado lay a strategist who'd studied under legendary generals, many of them women whose very names struck awe in the hearts of their armies. It was odd, he reflected, for a warlord who thrived on dominance to draw lessons from others. Yet here she was, poised between glorious assault and cautious calculation. Do you ever want to rule alone? He asked quietly. Esdeath hesitated, then shook her head. Power without challenge is no power at all. But with you by my side, perhaps I can learn what rulership truly means. Ethan placed a reassuring hand on hers. Then let's teach each other, together. Their pact forged, the first glimmer of dawn broke over the frozen horizon. Steel had been drawn, plans laid, and the battlefield awaited. In the silent promise of that pale light, Esdeath felt for the first time that conquest might be sweeter shared, and that even the fiercest general could find an ally in her greatest prize. With that unspoken vow, they turned away from the rampart and set forth to shape the destiny of this world, together. I was worried you might get hurt. Promise me you'll stay alert from now on. Ethan took a steadying breath and activated his time shift ability. As his power had grown, he no longer needed to clutch Esdeath so tightly during the jump. Unfamiliar with the process, Esdeath had instinctively coiled around him like a venomous serpent, if only to make sure he didn't accidentally leave her behind. Death itself held no terror for her. The real danger was abandonment mid-transit. In an instant, the world around them fractured and then reformed. When the motion stopped, they found themselves standing on a jagged cliff, overlooking a roiling slate-gray sea beneath storm-dark clouds. Another world? Esdeath whispered, her eyes wide with genuine curiosity as she took in the unfamiliar landscape. Ethan allowed himself a small smile. Yes, out there, beings far mightier than any you've ever faced dwell. Before she could reply, a thunderous roar split the air, followed almost instantly by a crashing boom that rattled the rocks beneath their feet. Sheets of rain swept in, cold and unrelenting. Ethan's expression sharpened. He squared his shoulders and met Esdeath's gaze. It's here, he said quietly. Can you feel it? Esdeath nodded, her tension coiling like a spring. In the distance, a hulking shape rose from the storm-churned waters, a dark silhouette heralding the arrival of the Deep-Sea King. Chapter 8. The Siege of the Dunes. A scorching wind rattled the dunes as the Deep-Sea Tribe's army swept across the parched plains, intent on claiming the land for their sunless sovereign. One by one, the tribe's A-rank lieutenants fell before the hero Ethan's blade. Each victory drew him closer to the source of the invasion, the dreaded Sea King. Ethan pressed forward, sweat stinging his eyes. The desert's bone-dry air sapped his strength, triggering a side effect of his power. He involuntarily entered shrunken mode, reducing both his size and his might. Though weakened, his resolve remained unbroken. The first to challenge him was Stinger, an A-rank warrior whose spiked gauntlets clattered as he charged. Ethan met the attack head-on, weaving between the blows despite his diminished stature. With a swift kick, he buckled Stinger's knees, then finished the fight with a single, decisive strike to the throat. Stinger crumpled in the sand, and Ethan pressed on. Not far ahead, the scout Max peered from behind a dune, eyes wide at the lone figure stalking through the desert. Before Max could sound an alarm, Ethan lunged, slashing across the scout's midsection. Max's surprised gasp was cut short as he collapsed to the ground. Ethan didn't pause to mourn. The fate of the land left no time for hesitation. But as Ethan raised his sword for a final blow, an arresting figure emerged from the heat haze, the S-rank prisoner, known as the Siren. Her siren song had shattered the resolve of countless heroes, and her beauty was said to ensnare even the strongest minds. She raised a slender hand, summoning arcs of brackish energy that hissed through the air. The two clashed in a whirl of steel and sorcery. Ethan's blade clanged against her enchanted trident as she attempted to beguile him with whispered promises of power. Though still in shrunken mode, he fought with every ounce of will he had, blocking her spells and closing the distance until he could drive her back. With a charged leap, he shattered her trident mid-air and sent the siren sprawling into the sand. She lay unconscious, her seductive song silenced at last. As Ethan caught his breath, a sudden blur streaked across the horizon. Sonic, the famed speedster, had been passing through the desert, drawn by the upheaval. In an instant, Sonic was on him, fists a humming cyclone. Ethan raised his guard, but every time he struck, Sonic was gone. His speed was leagues beyond Ethan's current ability. Then dark clouds gathered overhead, and the first drops of rain splashed onto the cracked earth. Ethan let the cool water seep into his pores. His body responded immediately. His normal size and strength surged back as he shifted out of shrunken mode. Water dripped from his hair and clothes, and the rain soothed the abrasion of battle. Sonic came at him again. This time, Ethan was ready. He planted his feet, closed his eyes for a heartbeat, and let instinct guide the counterattack. His strikes were slower than Sonic's lightning pace, but they each landed. With a final resound, in punch, Ethan sent Sonic tumbling through the sand, defeated yet unbroken. Sonic scrambled to his feet and conceded with a respectful nod before disappearing in a flash. Ethan stood alone at the center of the battlefield, rain washing away the grime and blood. The storm's distant roar was punctuated by hushed voices as other heroes emerged from the dunes. Among them were those who'd been waiting for reinforcements, heroes of the Hero Association, summoned to deal with the Sea King himself. They spoke of the S-rank hero Pig God, the heavyweight specialist dispatched to swallow the Sea King whole if necessary. Rumor had it, Pig God had already consumed dozens of deep-sea tribe foot soldiers. But in his gluttony, he'd grown too large to pass through the teleportation gate, and so he never arrived. Had he reached Ethan in time, perhaps the Sea King's reign would have been cut short in an instant. Or perhaps not. The Sea King's might was a matter of fierce debate among the hero ranks. Now, with the smaller threats vanquished, all eyes turned toward the distant coast where the Sea King lay waiting beneath the tides. The rainlit light reflected off Ethan's blade as he lifted it skyward, determination burning in his chest. The final showdown was at hand, and when water met steel, only one power would emerge victorious. Chapter 7. Hunt in the Storm. Ethan tapped his fingers on the console, studying the tactical readouts flickering across the screen. He sighed. If Sonic had been armed properly, we'd have taken down the Deep Sea King before the downpour ever began. Behind him, the team's newly released prisoner, now stronger than anyone remembered, stood silently. Only days ago, she decimated a creature whose strength rivaled the Deep Sea King's. Yet even that monstrosity proved no match for her superalloy blackluster cannon, which shredded it to pulp in seconds. Ethan scrolled through the files. Honestly, monsters at the Deep Sea King's level are trivial for us. The real threat appears only when we're dealing with dragon-tier opponents. That's when things get dangerous. He paused, recalling how many had mistakenly elevated the Deep Sea King to dragon status. In their eyes, his aquatic powers and brutal strength seemed unparalleled, but Ethan knew better. Based on current field reports and the Monster Association encounter, the Deep Sea King was merely SS-class fodder. The true test would come against an Eastern dragon or higher. Esdeath, Ethan called, glancing up as the icy general approached. She flashed him a triumphant grin. Permission to hunt? He nodded. Be my guest. Esdeath wasted no time. Clad in her frost armor, she strode into the howling storm, her twin ice lances glinting in the dying light. Moments later, a massive silhouette emerged from the churning waves, a deep-sea predator far larger than any they'd faced before. Ethan watched the radar as Esdeath closed in, the storm's fury matching her own. In that charged silence, he couldn't help but wonder, had they underestimated the ocean's most fearsome apex? Only one way to find out. Esdeath surveyed the creature before her, her pale eyes narrowing. She'd seen countless sea monsters in the depths, beasts so dangerous that even the Navy referred to them as vermin of the abyss. Yet they were prized as delicacies, their flesh rumored to grant strange benefits to the human body. Esdeath smirked. Humans, you say? I wonder how tasty I am. The deep-sea horror, a grotesque hybrid of great white shark, giant crab, and man, seemed to grin back. Sharp mandibles clicked with anticipation. Then, with uncanny speed, it lunged. The beast's massive pincer descended like a wrecking ball. Esdeath met its blow with one ungloved hand, or so it appeared. In truth, she had already molded ice around her forearm, crafting a seamless gauntlet of diamond-hard frost in an instant. The cold armor stopped the claw's impact with a resounding crack. The creature recoiled, stunned by the chill that pulsed through its limb. Esdeath's smile widened. This was only the beginning. Even after that thunderous strike, the glacial barrier held firm. No cracks, no falling shards. Esdeath hadn't yet unleashed her full power, but she wasn't about to take any chances. She was in an unknown world, after all. Humans might be fascinated by the unfamiliar, but they were every bit as afraid of it. What? The deep-sea tribesmen cried, stunned that their assault hadn't even chipped the ice. Esdeath offered a cold, knowing smile. She lifted her gloved hand to her lips and exhaled. A swirling breath of frigid air swept over the warriors, freezing them solid in an instant. The technique was inspired by Kula's frost breath, but Esdeath lent it her own regal poise and big sister authority. Moments later, the frozen fighters shattered like brittle glass, their icy fragments scattering across the cavern floor. Pathetic, Esdeath said, brushing frost from her sleeve. Barely a level 1 threat. Beside her, Ethan nodded, confidence shining in his eyes. That's good news. It means we can face the deep-sea king at full strength, his true wet form. Esdeath inclined her head. Then let's keep moving. The real challenge is waiting ahead. With that, they pressed deeper into the abyss. Her sudden arrival made the deep-sea king's eyes narrow. Moments earlier, it had bested the seductive prisoner and caught Genos off guard, but now it felt as though a primeval beast had crept up behind it. A wave of unease washed over the creature. It knew it was facing a truly formidable opponent. Chapter 483, Universe-Level Threat. Death looms. Ethan's entire body screamed warnings. Universe-level attack incoming. Certain death. Who? He gasped, every fiber of his being on high alert. The deep-sea king, though shaken, forced himself to turn. Striding through the wreckage toward them was a woman in impossibly high heels. Her hair was ice blue, her eyes colder than a glacier. It was Esdeath. Inside the ruined shelter behind them, terrified survivors whispered, "Is that Esdeath? I thought the S-Class heroes had wiped her out. It doesn't look like Hell Tornado either. What are we supposed to do? Are we really going to die here?" "She's so beautiful," one man stammered. "If this is how I go, at least it'll be memorable." Others frantically scanned the debris for an escape route, but the battlefield offered no refuge. Ethan squared his shoulders, stepping out into the open. "Esdeath!" he called, every eye now on him. "They say you're the queen of monsters. Prove it." Esdeath let out a low, frosty laugh. Ice crystals crackled around her ankles. "You want a demonstration? How delicious." A savage grin split the deep-sea king's face. He began to morph, his limbs swelling, scales darkening, a final, universe-level evolution. Legends said this form could fell Saitama with a single blow. The power roaring through him was immense, but it devoured his life force by the second. He glanced at the sky. The rain had intensified, each drop charged with moisture that fueled his transformation. Perfect. Ethan drew his sword, the air crackling between Frost Empress and Sea Lord. The storm around them deepened as two titans braced for a clash that would shake the very universe. Boom! In an instant, Esdeath and the Deep-Sea King lunged at each other, their speed so great they seemed to skip frames in the downpour. The force of their collision blasted rainwater aside in violent sheets, carving temporary channels through the flooded streets. Genos, half hidden behind a fractured wall, snatched at stray droplets as they slashed past. He'd been about to warn Esdeath to fall back. After all, she didn't even appear in the Hero Association's database. To him, she was an unregistered civilian, completely out of her depth here. Yet before he could call out, she'd already been struck full-on by the Deep-Sea King's crushing blow. The impact sent her flying back several meters, but she landed on her feet, steady as ever. Genos' mouth went dry. He knew the Deep-Sea King was ferocious, but this version was somehow more powerful than the one he'd faced. And shockingly, it rivaled, and perhaps even exceeded, the capabilities of the Imperial-grade biomechanical weapon Ethan had supplied to Esdeath. Esdeath charged again. Ice gauntlets formed around her fists, glinting with lethal intent. The Deep-Sea King roared and met her head-on, his own massive arms slicing through water like blades. Each punch thundered through the air, yet neither combatant yielded. Esdeath realized with mounting awe that no super threat she'd sparred with, no matter how dangerous, had matched this foe's raw, brutal strength in close quarters. Even the Deep-Sea King seemed taken aback. He'd fully expected to dominate this battlefield. Facing Esdeath, however, was proving far more challenging than any previous conquest. As raindrops clattered like hail around them, two titans fought for supremacy, while the city watched in stunned silence. The Deep-Sea King had assumed that, with the Underground King fallen, no one remained to challenge his rule. Confident in his own might, he led the Deep-Sea tribe in a sweeping invasion of the surface world, only to discover that humanity still harbored far fiercer warriors than he had ever imagined. One after another they fell, and now he faced an opponent more vexing than the rest. Every time the Deep-Sea King's colossal fist struck his adversary, the human barely flinched, yet the recoil left the king himself shivering to his core. A bone-deep chill radiated from each impact, as though ice had crystallized in his veins. Only his race's extraordinarily rapid blood flow and unparalleled heat generation systems kept his life's waters from freezing solid. If not for those adaptations, he would already be an icy statue. The king's black eyes glittered with ravenous anticipation. "What a dangerous foe," he rumbled, "but if I devour him, I will become invincible." On the field before him, however, the human warrior, Ethan, had already grown wearisome of play. A faint, amused smile curved his lips. "That's enough," he said softly. With a graceful motion, he summoned his ice magic. Crystals formed in midair, coalescing into a massive sword that hovered like a shard of winter's heart, so immense it might have crushed a boulder, yet as weightless as smoke in Ethan's outstretched hand. And with that single blade, the final reckoning began. After that thunderous swing, the Deep-Sea King didn't dare meet Esdeath's blade head-on. His impenetrable momentum carried him clear out of the way, his first real dodge in the fight. But Esdeath's mastery of ice was unparalleled. In only a few precise strokes, she wounded him. Facing that lethal arc of frost, the monster had no counter. "Ice and snow!" Esdeath cried, unleashing a localized version of her ultimate. Instantly, the pounding rain froze solid, turning the ground to slick, crystalline sheets and the clouds above into towering ice formations. The downpour transformed into swirling snow, and one bald figure nearby shivered so hard he sneezed. "Whoa, it's freezing all of a sudden," Saitama grumbled, rubbing his arms. Ethan, standing off to the side with Saitama, couldn't help but smirk. It was a little absurd that the strongest hero in the world was shivering like any ordinary man. Even though Saitama had lost his limiter, and thus the power to simply mimic any opponent's strength, he understood better than anyone what no limiter really meant. Brick by brick, his body had been adapting to the most brutal conditions. At this rate, Ethan mused, Saitama should have acclimated to the cold long ago. Yet here he was, sneezing and stomping his feet against the ice. Ethan shook his head. If this frigid blast was enough to rattle Saitama, then perhaps there was more to Esdeath's power than raw freezing ability. He tapped his fist into his open palm, ready to see just how far the blue-haired general could push them all. Ethan watched as Esdeath unleashed a furious storm of ice and snow. The Deep-Sea King reeled beneath her onslaught, his scales cracking like glass. With a single, decisive slash of her sword, she struck him down, and then, with a final, merciless blow, froze him solid, ensuring there would be no chance of resurrection. "Master," Ethan called out, keeping his distance from the crystalline corpse. "Is there anyone more powerful than that?" Esdeath sheathed her blade and met his gaze, a confident glint in her eyes. "Indeed there is. A much mightier opponent will arrive soon." Ethan's heart sank. He knew exactly who she meant. Boros. Even Esdeath's devastating Mahabhatmo technique would be no match for Boros's boundless stamina. As long as his core remained charged, he could shrug off any injury. Saitama had pummeled him relentlessly, blows to every part of his body, yet Boros simply healed and kept fighting. He was the first true boss-level threat, capable of surviving a hail of ordinary punches and still standing. Only Saitama's ultimate energy-draining attack had left him half dead. Had that strike not pierced Boros's energy center, he might very well have risen again. Ethan drew a steadying breath. This battle would demand everything they had, and then some. Even Esdeath's preemptive use of Mahabhatma couldn't finish off Boros. Ignoring the grateful cheers and outstretched hands of the survivors, she and her companion simply turned their backs and walked away. Behind them, representatives of the Hero Association watched in frustration. They had hoped to recruit Esdeath. Her fearsome power and striking beauty would be a golden ticket to merchandising, much like the handsome mask. After all, the association's coffers weren't filled only by wealthy patrons. Ordinary donors contributed too. Without that public support, they couldn't afford the immense costs of repairing the damage from battles between heroes and monsters, let alone compensate victims. Meanwhile, when Ethan first arrived in the One Punch Man universe, he knew exactly how long he could stay exposed to sunlight. Roughly 200 days. His once plump cells transformed, ravenously absorbing solar energy to fuel unprecedented growth. In a wholly unscientific burst, Ethan's power level skyrocketed until his total energy exceeded that of an entire universe in the blink of an eye. By theoretical calculation, the universe's total energy can be expressed as E equals dE dt, T equals H equals CT, 44, 7.5215582076, 10 watts, times 4.3582752, T equals 3.2781025 joules. In less than the time it takes to blink, Ethan had absorbed and surpassed that staggering benchmark. In this story, the infinite universe is understood as the combination of everything we can observe plus everything we cannot, all driven by never-ending expansion. Because the universe's rate of expansion far outpaces our capacity to observe it, vast regions remain forever beyond our view, hence the sense of true infinity. Note, however, that this infinite universe is a narrative concept, not the same as mathematical infinity. Chapter 484, Esdeath's Upgrade. Ethan's total energy had already surpassed that of an ordinary universe, but not yet enough to obliterate one in a single strike. To be certified as universe level, one must possess the power to destroy an entire cosmos in one blow, and Ethan still wasn't sure he'd reached that threshold. Looking for a momentary respite, Ethan and Esdeath slipped away to a secluded mountain retreat. As they settled by a crystalline pool, Ethan glanced at his companion and asked, "Master, are there any truly formidable warriors left in this world?" Esdeath frowned, though her restless eyes betrayed her boredom. She never stayed still for long. Too many things fascinated her. Lately, her private indulgence with Ethan had eclipsed the thrill of battle, the rush of the hunt, and even the exquisite art of torture. Still, even that could grow tiresome. Whenever her appetite for one delight waned, she immediately sought something new to entertain her. "I can't devote all my time to sunbathing," Ethan mused, watching the pale sunlight filter through the trees. He didn't need mere solar energy. What he craved was the subtle hue of daylight in different worlds, the shifting wavelengths, the texture of light itself. To him, charging meant absorbing the unique differences that each world's sun could offer. With that in mind, he turned to Esdeath and said, "There's someone I want you to meet, a legend known as Bangu the Silver Fang. Let's pay him a visit." Esdeath's eyes glinted. "A new target to test my strength? Excellent." But as always, she was equally thrilled by the prospect of new sensations, whether found on the battlefield or elsewhere. Together, they rose and set off once more, driven by Ethan's quest for cosmic power and Esdeath's insatiable appetite for novelty. Their next encounter would push them both further into uncharted territory. "Who are you two?" Bangu peered at his unexpected guests, frowning. He'd heard rumors that the Heroes Association was sending someone, but no one had given him names or details. Both newcomers looked unsettlingly out of place, their presence at odds with everything he knew of this world. He couldn't pinpoint why, only that neither of them seemed human in the usual sense. Ethan Fitzpatrick offered a polite bow. "I'm Ethan, and this is Esdeath. We've come to challenge you, to spar." The old warrior let out a low chuckle. At his age, he'd long since traded the sword for ledgers. He preferred negotiating disputes for profit rather than dueling opponents for sport. Yet he could not deny the fierce resolve emanating from Esdeath. In all his years, he'd rarely seen such unbreakable will. "Extraordinary," Bangu murmured, locking eyes with Esdeath. "How many battles did it take to temper your spirit so?" Esdeath inclined her head once. "Countless, sir." Ethan stepped forward, voice calm. "Please, don't be alarmed. We only seek a friendly match, to learn from one of the greatest fighters in this world." Bangu studied them a moment longer, curiosity outweighing caution. Finally, he smiled. "Very well, show me what you've got." Ethan stood with his arms crossed, a half smile on his face. "Why would we need the teacher's help? I can handle her just fine on my own." Chalanzi, who had been lounging nearby, jumped up at once. "Master Ban, I haven't finished my chores. My room's still a mess. May I go clean up before?" Master Ban raised a hand to stop him. The old instructor's eyes were stern, but not unkind. He knew Chalanzi's strengths and weaknesses. The boy wasn't the most talented of his apprentices, but Ban valued his loyalty and good nature. Without those qualities, Chalanzi would never have remained as his last disciple. "Go on," Ban said, his voice softer now. "We're not monsters here." Chalanzi bowed quickly and hurried off. Ethan let out a small laugh. "See, we're harmless. Well, almost harmless." Esdeath's lips curved in a challenging smile. "Oh, I doubt that. Let's find out." In an instant, she sprang forward, her blade flashing like a streak of moonlight. "Got." Ethan barely registered her movement before Master Ban's form blurred. Ban's body twisted fluidly, as if he were made of water, and Esdeath's strike whooshed through empty air. Ethan's eyes widened. He hadn't expected Ban to evade so effortlessly. Even Chalanzi, returning from his errand just in time to see the opening moments, couldn't hide his surprise. Esdeath pulled back, studying Ban with newfound interest. "Well done," she said, a hint of amusement in her voice. "You've caught my attention, teacher." Master Ban simply inclined his head, calm and unruffled. The courtyard fell silent, the challenge set, and all three understood this clash was only just beginning. Chapter 10: The River's Strength. Ethan watched with unblinking focus as Esdeath, one of the Imperial Fist Temple's fiercest prodigies, launched herself at Bangu in a single, fluid motion. Every shift of her shoulders, every coil and release of her limbs moved like water sweeping around a rock. He'd seen masters of the temple's flow fist style before, but this was on another level. Esdeath's long leg arced in a savage sweep toward Bangu's midsection. He met the blow with the flat of his palm, as though stopping a gust of wind. Ethan noted how the force bent around Bangu's guard, dissipating instead of crashing through. In that instant, he didn't merely observe. His body absorbed the pattern, storing the circulating energy in his muscles before he even realized it. Technique, timing, weight shifts, they all etched themselves into his reflexes as if he'd practiced them for years. For Esdeath, though, it was a rude awakening. Her kicks, thrusts, and sweeping strikes, all backed by raw power, fell short against Bangu's calm, anchored defense. She struck again and again, each attack deflected or diverted, never once breaking his posture. Bangu's eyes glittered with curiosity. Her ferocity was unquestionable, her power undeniable, yet her way of channeling energy, her fa-jin, was crude, lacking any real subtlety. He could not fathom why someone of her reputation would be so one-dimensional in execution. "Keep going," Bangu invited, voice cool. "Show me you can actually stop me." Without hesitation, Esdeath drew a swirl of ice into the air. Frost coalesced into dagger-sharp shards that she unleashed in a blizzard of crystalline death. Bangu watched them approach, then glanced at Ethan. Realization dawned on his face. "He's not just fast or strong," Bangu breathed. "He's superpowered." He shook his head, a slow grin forming. "No wonder your fa-jin feels amateurish. You've never faced anyone like him before." Eth froze mid-assault, chest heaving, her icy volley halted between them. She looked from Bangu to Ethan, questions burning in her eyes. In that charged silence, all three understood the truth. This fight had just begun, and its outcome would be far more complicated than any of them had expected. Ethan suddenly realized his opponent wielded a true superpower. In the world of One Punch Man, supernatural abilities were common enough, but he'd never seen anyone master an elemental power like ice. Sure, there were flashy types, people like Qingyan who concealed flamethrowers up their sleeves and pretended to breathe fire, but Esdeath's gift was genuine. In Ethan's view, that was why her style looked deceptively simple. It wasn't that her technique was mediocre, it was lethally efficient. Compared to the martial arts he'd known back in the Crimson Eye world, fighters here were on a whole different level. Esdeath's combat creed, swift, precise, merciless, had been refined to perfection, but raw skill alone wouldn't win every fight. With a single, almost casual motion of his hand, Ethan deflected a volley of razor-sharp ice spikes. Esdeath's eyes widened in surprise. She'd never encountered physical prowess quite like his. She could sense the hidden force behind his defense, but its nature eluded her. "If this dojo freezes over," she warned, voice cool, "my foolish disciple will have a terrible time cleaning up. Let's take this battle outside." Recognizing that Esdeath truly possessed an elemental superpower, Ethan decided it was unwise to fight within these walls. Without another word, he turned on his heel and strode out of the dojo. Esdeath didn't care about the battlefield or the terrain. Wherever he went, she followed. Ethan planted his feet firmly, hands neatly folded behind his back, and spoke without turning around. "The style I've mastered channels attacks into a strange, redirecting force, draining their impact. A blow that would normally cripple or even kill loses its edge if it lands head-on against me." Esdeath's pale blue eyes narrowed. Before she could strike, Ethan sprang forward in the blink of an eye. His fist descended like a tumbling boulder, but it never met solid flesh. Instead, it clipped through thin air, and Esdeath found herself staring at his afterimage. He pivoted on a single fluid step, footwork so seamless it recalled the rushing of a mountain stream. With uncanny timing, he aimed precise, lightning-fast jabs at her vital points. Esdeath's only choice was to throw up an ice-forged shield, arms locked across her chest. She gasped, thinking, impossible. The flowing water, rock-shattering fist is meant to flow endlessly, no pauses, yet it carries the force to break stone as easily as glass. Before she could brace herself further, Ethan's barrage exploded into motion, hundreds of punches unleashed in an instant, each one riding the current of his special technique, each one threatening to tear through her defenses. Chapter 485, Flowing Water versus Esdeath. Esdeath's arms throbbed with agony. The ice shield she'd conjured splintered instantly under the impact, and the sheer force of Bangu's blow drove straight through her defenses, sending her sprawling backward. Each time she retreated, a sheet of ice crystallized under her feet, a cruel testament to the power behind that punch. Fury and fascination warred within her. Drawing on instinct, she tried to analyze the principles of Bangu's flowing water-shattering fist, its speed, its fluidity, the way it struck like a torrent. "Intriguing," she murmured, licking her lips. There was nothing Esdeath relished more than a formidable adversary. Only such a challenge could stoke her desire to grow even stronger. "All right," she said, eyes gleaming. "Let's see if your flowing rock-shattering fist can withstand mine." She inhaled deeply, steam curling from her lips in the chill air, then pressed her palms together. A lethal frost radiated outward, chilling the ground beneath her. General Binglin. At her command, a colossal ice titan, easily tens of meters tall, loomed into existence behind her. With a broad sweep of its arm, it coalesced a razor-sharp blade of ice hundreds of meters long. Then it swung downward in a devastating arc, aiming to cleave through Bangu as though he were nothing but air. The attack's raw force was enough to flatten a small mountain. Bangu's expression tightened as he braced himself. Ethan felt the air crackle with Esdeath's power, a chilling torrent of energy that made every hair on his arms stand on end. He dared not relax for even a heartbeat. Supernatural gifts like hers always outclassed the finest martial artists. No amount of rigorous training could fully bridge the gap between raw talent and the impossible feats a superpowered being could perform. Still, Ethan had devoted his life to pushing his own physical limits, forging his body into a weapon capable of meeting such threats head-on. With a sharp exhale, he unleashed a flurry of fists so fast they became after-images. Boom, boom, boom. Each collision rang out like thunder, shockwaves rippling through the arena. Ethan's arms ached, but he refused to yield. A flicker of surprise crossed Esdeath's icy blue eyes. She hadn't expected him to weather her assault so long. "Your physical prowess is impressive," she conceded, the corner of her mouth curving into a cool smirk. "But if brute strength is all you have, you might as well admit defeat now." With effortless grace, she clasped her hands together, gathering her next devastating attack. "General Binglin, descend from the heavens." At Esdeath's command, the ice giant swept its colossal arm through the sky. Tens of gigantic icicles sheared off the clouds and plummeted toward Ethan, forming a deadly ring around him. Each frozen spike spanned several meters. Even someone as formidable as Ethan would be crushed by a single blow. They fell so densely that escape seemed impossible. Ethan let out a dry laugh. "Is that your best shot?" He wove effortlessly between the falling daggers, refusing to engage head-on. His body, no longer as youthful and resilient as it once was, hated the cold. Every joint ached. Shaking off the chill, he inhaled deeply, and a darker, more potent aura burst forth from him, glimmering like molten bronze. Esdeath felt the hairs on her arms stand on end at the surge of power. "So this is only the beginning," she murmured. In an instant, Ethan's aura exploded, and he became a streak of blinding light hurtling straight at her. Esdeath, her own ice shield shattered in a heartbeat, knew the flowing golden body technique inside and out. Her gift for rapid adaptation was unmatched, but against this newly unleashed force, she would need every ounce of skill she had. Ethan's flowing river-shattering fist was far more than a frantic flurry of blows. It relied on a constant, swelling current of power. Each strike flowed seamlessly into the next, with just enough force held back to reserve energy for what came after. Coupled with the stylized breathing technique, his blood pulsed like a raging river, unleashing unbroken strength in a single exhalation. He had deliberately avoided deploying his deadliest move, the fang-protruding finger, knowing full well it would strike down any opponent without mercy. That technique was a guaranteed kill. Even the hardest villains never walked away from it. Yet here and now, Ethan focused on the shattering fist alone. Across the courtyard, Esdeath watched him with a curious tilt of her head. She folded her arms and cocked an eyebrow. "That is." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. She had just adopted the opening posture of the flowing river-shattering fist. Impossible. No one could imitate it without mastering its secret breathing pattern. How had she learned it? Bang! Bang! He unleashed two more blows, each one driving forward in perfect rhythm. Steam curled from his fists as he prepared for the next surge, unaware that Esdeath was already moving to meet him, her expression as unreadable as ever. Bang! Ethan and Esdeath's blows met in midair with a thunderous roar, each strike ringing out like a drumbeat. They traded punches in a relentless downpour of force. As the clash dragged on, Ethan's confidence wavered into unease. Esdeath, clumsy at first, had rapidly adapted to his rhythm and speed. Not only did she block his Lu Shuian shattering fist, her counters flowed with equal ferocity, deflecting his wide-ranging assaults as though they were nothing. The true power of the shattering fist lay in its ubiquity, hundreds of strikes cascading like a swift river, impossible to predict, let alone stop. Still, Esdeath proved herself a master of offense. Though her parries lacked the finesse to neutralize every blow, her unceasing barrage forced Ethan onto the defensive, compelling him to use his legs, something he had stubbornly avoided, to ward off her strikes. Hundreds of hits, 1,000 blows. In mere moments, their exchange numbered in the thousands. And with each collision, Esdeath felt her body overheating. Her blood pounded through her veins, each surge granting her a fraction more speed and power, but at the cost of unbearable heat. She could push herself no further without a way to dissipate the roaring inferno building within. Liu Shuian's progress had stalled. Without the proper breathing techniques, he simply couldn't unleash the full power of the Hobei fist. If he didn't overcome that limitation, he would remain trapped at the same level forever. That was also why Goro had risked everything to steal the ancient boxing manual. Bang's eyes widened, when he saw tendrils of white vapor rising from Esdeath's skin. Alarmed, he called out, "Stop! You're overheating yourself. You'll burn through your blood and collapse." Esdeath's reply was calm, almost amused. "Don't worry, I haven't even broken a sweat yet." Her blood, it seemed, had reached its freezing point, but never solidified. The air around her, once blistering hot, suddenly dropped in temperature, as if obeying some unspoken command. In that instant, Esdeath tapped into a previously hidden reservoir of power. Bang staggered backward on disbelief. Could this be a superhuman ability? Could one truly manipulate heat and cold so effortlessly? They clashed again and again. Bang, relying on his breathing methods, channeled every ounce of heat into each blow, hoping to crack her defenses. But Esdeath's onslaught only grew more furious. After nearly 5,000 exchanges, even he could no longer keep pace. With a final staggering step back, Bang conceded the field, his body dangerously close to its limit. Even a body honed through countless trials couldn't withstand the searing heat Esdeath summoned. Sweat streamed down Bangu's face, his vision swimming. With a ragged breath, he murmured, "I yield. You win." He knew that to stand a chance, he'd have to unleash his true power, and once unleashed, there'd be no containing the destruction. Better to concede now than let things spiral out of control. Esdeath's eyes glittered with hunger for more battle. She raised her blade, ready to press the attack. Before she could strike again, Ethan stepped forward, his calm authority cutting through the tension. He laid a steadying hand on Esdeath's shoulder. "That's enough," he said. "This battle ends here." Chapter 486, Whirlwind Iron Fist. Esdeath had already begun learning the basics of the flowing rock-shattering fist, and now Ethan was teaching her the authentic form of the style. This martial art's potential was limitless. Just look at Hungry Wolf as proof. Whether in the original lineage or a later revival, the stronger the practitioner's physique, the more devastating each blow becomes. In this system, raw strength translates directly into knockout power. Esdeath possessed unrivaled physical might, but her one real weakness was close-quarters combat. Learning the flowing rock-shattering fist and mastering its specialized breathing method alongside it would elevate her body's capabilities to new heights. She would no longer be a fearsome ice empress whose only strategy was overwhelming force. She could meet any opponent blow for blow. Bangu had once considered taking on an apprentice to preserve the flowing rock-shattering fist. But when Esdeath's cold-blooded cruelty revealed itself, her lack of hesitation in slaughtering countless foes, he wavered. Her ruthlessness unnerved him, and he held back on passing down the deeper secrets of the art. Ethan, on the other hand, seemed entirely undaunted by her past deeds. Yet his own detachment meant he showed little interest in making disciples. One afternoon, as Esdeath drilled her stance beneath the courtyard's pale sun, Ethan stepped forward and quietly began to explain the technique in full. The flowing rock-shattering fist is born from decades, if not centuries, of observing nature's waters. Its creator studied the patterns of streams carving through stone, the relentless force of rivers eroding bedrock. By internalizing the principles of flowing water, its momentum, its unpredictability, you learn to channel your own power in fluid, unbreakable arcs. Every punch becomes like a rushing current, deceptively gentle at first, but once unleashed, it carries the weight of a mountain. Esdeath listened intently, absorbing every word. With Ethan's calm guidance, she would soon master the art of iron fists that struck with both the grace of water and the fury of shattering rock. In the forging of her new technique, ice and iron would become one, and the world would tremble under her next onslaught. Esdeath watched Ethan's movements with growing fascination. Every punch he threw felt like the collapse of a dam or the impact of a roaring waterfall, unstoppable, overwhelming. "These fighters of this world," she murmured, as though discovering a new toy, "they're truly something else." Ethan's calm reply came like a ripple through still water. Powerful blows are only part of it. True strength in a fist isn't just about impact. It's about persistence. Think of water wearing down rock. It's not a single crash, but the endless drip that finally penetrates stone. Endurance and controlled, steady force, that's what really counts. As he spoke, Esdeath recognized the subtle aura fluttering around him, the telltale sign of the blood-breathing technique she'd been studying. He stepped closer, his expression patient yet earnest. "Show me your stance," he said. "Relax your shoulders, soften your grip, let me guide you." What began as casual instruction soon revealed its depth. Ethan moved her arm through each motion, correcting angles, adjusting her breathing. Though his tone was light, almost playful, every tip he offered carried the weight of experience. Esdeath followed along, her mind sharp, her determination blazing. With each correction, she felt energy pooling at her core, then rushing outward like a surging current. A soft, rushing sound echoed in her ears, as if a river had awakened inside her. In that moment, she knew she was no longer merely a warrior practicing a technique. She had become the water itself, patient, unyielding, and destined to carve her path through any obstacle. Nothing could stand before her relentless flow. Ethan watched Esdeath's biomagnetic field fluctuate in an ever-stranger pattern, the energy spiraling around his right hand like a rushing straw. Biomagnetism, after all, sprang from the bioelectric currents between cells, and while one could theoretically shape that field, Ethan's foremost concern was Esdeath's well-being. Yet the martial prodigy before him showed no sign of faltering. Having just mastered the flowing rock-shattering fist, Esdeath had finally reached Bangu's level. In raw power, he could likely fell Bangu with a single blow, rendering any further attempt to break Bangu's defenses all but unnecessary. Esdeath flexed his gloved fist, the rippling energy subsiding with a soft hum. "I feel it. My strength keeps growing," he said, tone both candid and pleased. "This unpredictable circulation of force, flowing like water, actually reinforces my chi, my blood, my very body. As long as I prevent overheating or overload, my physique will naturally refine itself down to the finest detail. That's the beauty of meticulous training." Ethan nodded, admiration and a trace of unease in his eyes. No matter how rigorous human discipline could be, there were always limits, hidden fractures one couldn't mend. But the flowing rock-shattering fist was different, tapping into the body's innate energy in ways that transcended ordinary martial practice. "It allows your blood to mimic the flow of water," Ethan said, eyes bright with excitement. "Like a current seeping through every crack, it reaches every capillary in your body, truly all-pervasive. Now, let's pay a visit to my brother, Master Bangpu. He's the one who practices Whirlwind's Antiken." He paused to let that sink in. Whirlwind's Antiken and flowing rock-shattering fist sprang from the same origin, two complementary paths forged in the same body. The deepest secret of Whirlwind's Antiken is the hand-sword slash, a technique that erupts with an aura so razor-sharp it can cut through gold and jade. When you combine Whirlwind's Anti-Fist with flowing rock-shattering fist, you unleash what many consider the strongest punch in the entire One Punch Man universe. Esdeath's eyes gleamed. "Then what are we waiting for?" Master Bangpu emerged from the training hall like a living legend. Despite his age, his crown was partially bald, the silver strands at his temples tied back. His physique was nothing short of breathtaking, a wasp waist framed by arms as thick and powerful as an ape's. Every step, every gesture, radiated an odd magnetic grace. It was clear at a glance that this was a martial artist who had pushed his body to the very edge of human potential. Ethan stood before Esdeath, not as a doddering elder, but as a formidable martial artist worthy of her full attention. With each slow inhalation, the very air around him seemed to bend and swirl, rippling outward for hundreds of meters. Though he lacked the burning combat lust of his younger brother Bangu, Ethan had agreed to this sparring match as soon as Esdeath claimed she'd just fought Bangu and learned his flowing rock-breaking fist directly from the blade's edge. Preposterous, Ethan had thought when she first made her boast. Yet the moment Esdeath released a controlled pulse of her water-infused force, his doubt vanished. The flow she commanded was every bit as refined and deadly as Bangu's, each movement precise, each current perfectly balanced. Ethan's stern face softened into a respectful nod. "You've mastered the flowing rock-breaking fist," he acknowledged. "Very well. Let's see how you fare against my Whirlwind Slayer Iron Fist." Esdeath's eyes gleamed with interest. Like all true masters, Ethan welcomed the exchange of techniques. Their tradition prized openness and the sharing of knowledge. After all, what greater joy could there be than to see one's disciples surpass their teachers and manifest brilliance no one had yet imagined? Esdeath hadn't truly inherited the ultimate bloodline. yet her command over her chi and lifeblood was rock solid. She was the kind of prodigy who could pluck every ounce of power from even the subtlest technique. With a sharp exhale, she drew on the hidden reservoirs of strength beneath her skin. Channeling it through her signature flowing rock-breaking fist, she guided her blood into a torrent of undercurrents, rapids, and explosive surges. Then, just as the energy peaked, her right fist rocketed toward Bang in a single unstoppable strike, water exploding outward on impact. Bang's eyes glowed with interest. He narrowed his gaze, fully aware of the awesome force behind Esdeath's blow. Stroking his beard as if pondering a simple puzzle, he vanished, and in the next instant reappeared at her flank. His left hand drifted into place like a passing breeze, materializing beside her in a swirl of mist. Esdeath's breath caught. Bang's speed surpassed her expectations, and even outmatched her own. After all, the wind itself excels in speed and agility, but Esdeath's response was on another level. In an instant, her body rippled like liquid, slipping past Bump's outstretched hand. He swung a punch, their fists met, and shards of frigid air slammed into the surroundings. This wasn't the simple cool of a breeze. It was the biting chill of a blade grazing the most vulnerable parts of the body. Chapter 487. The Disaster Begins. Esdeath slipped aside to evade the blow, yet Lu Shuiyan's shattering fist still sliced through the air with uncanny precision, as though it were a living blade. Could Feng truly harness such power? Blood pounding, Esdeath's speed suddenly surged. She overtook Bump in an instant. His eyes widened in disbelief. No one had ever managed to outpace him before. Flowing water, 1,000 strikes, Esdeath roared, thrusting her fist skyward. A torrent of razor-sharp wind blades cascaded down, enveloping Bump from every angle. He staggered, momentarily stunned as the gusts dissipated into a gentle breeze, allowing him to slip aside as if ducking past a painting. But before he could regroup, a spiraling vortex coiled around Esdeath's arm, shredding her sleeve and carving a deep gouge into her forearm. Bump reeled back in shock. He had never expected Esdeath to master the whirlwind slasher so swiftly. Her form may have been an outward mimicry of the technique, yet it was frighteningly accurate. Once she grasped the essence of the art, her rate of learning far outstripped even the original Shattering Fist's best exploits, and she wove it into her style with terrifying ease. Esdeath now unleashed the whirlwind-slashing Iron Fist and the flooding rock smashing fist together in a single strike, something Bump had never imagined possible. Those two techniques were always kept separate. No one could coordinate both at once, let alone merge them into a more powerful blow. Yet there she stood, doing exactly that. Before Bump even had a chance to react, Esdeath shaped her right hand into a conical blast that struck every vital point on his body in rapid succession. Puff, puff, puff. The air itself seemed to shatter. Bump staggered and fell to his knees. For a heartbeat, he thought he'd been mortally wounded. But as the dust settled, he realized he felt no pain. Had he reflexively summoned a whirlwind barrier? Even so, walking away entirely unharmed seemed impossible. "You fought well," Esdeath said, picking up his fallen military cap and straightening it on his head. "A shame this has to be your end." Bump let out a wry sigh. He hadn't expected Esdeath to be this formidable. It was a humbling surprise. Brushing dust from his uniform, he stood and casually clasped his hands behind his back. "There's no need to hold anything back." Esdeath shook her head, a faint smile tugging at her lips. After all, she already had Ethan on her side. Ethan shook his head. "My master is powerful enough to shatter a flowing water rock fist, let alone the whirlwind Iron Fist. I really don't need the Slayer Iron Fist essence." Bump's jaw dropped. "You're seriously turning it down? You're doing the offering a favor. Don't get too cocky." Ethan offered a faint smile. "True strength isn't about hoarding every secret. There's always a limit, no matter how talented you are." With that, Bump grumbled but moved to leave. Esdeath lingered, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Master, you've studied both the whirlwind Iron Fist essence and the combined strike technique. You treat me like an encyclopedia." Ethan returned her grin. "Since you insist," he reached out, tracing the invisible lines of the whirlwind Iron Fist's core principles in the air. Then, with equal clarity, he demonstrated the flow and timing behind the combined strike technique. Aside from the legendary monster god slaying fist and the hungry wolf's breathing method, These were among the most devastating unarmed arts ever devised, but Ethan's mind worked faster than any manual. In mere heartbeats, he absorbed every nuance and then reshaped them. A new martial form took shape in his thoughts, a seamless fusion of tempest and current. Each blow would strike like a cyclone's surge, each guard flow like rushing water. Its power didn't just match the combined strike technique, it surpassed it entirely. Esdeath and Bump watched in stunned silence as Ethan's aura rippled with potential. The chapter of his master's encyclopedia was closed, and a far deadlier volume was just beginning. It's almost laughably easy for a true super genius. See it once and you understand it. Practice it a bit and you become proficient. Become proficient and you grasp every subtlety. Grasp every subtlety, and mastery follows naturally. Scaling to the very summit, transcending the limits of everyone else, might as well be a Sunday stroll. Esdeath wasn't the sort to sacrifice the big prize for a minor curiosity. Her faith in Ethan was absolute, so he revealed to her the ultimate culmination of his work, the feng shui life and death fist. Ethan's opening strike, the explosive air-splitting fist, is already a masterful fusion of blows, but in his hands it had evolved to near perfection. He'd also devised the merciless Jiaoyalong killing fist. Without hesitation, Esdeath adjusted her circulation, aligned her breathing, and centered her chai. The feng shui life and death fist offered her unmatched power and adaptability. Later that afternoon, as Ethan guided her through drills in the training hall, tragedy struck elsewhere. The great prophet Shidabawa choked to death on a simple throat lozenge, but not before he uttered one final, ominous prophecy. When the Heroes Association received the news and learned his last words, they moved at once, summoning every S-class hero to confront the crisis he foresaw. Today, I'm going to show you true power. Ethan had planned that. If Lord Boros hadn't arrived yet, he'd escort Esdeath to track down the weird association. But at that moment, a colossal spacecraft burst into the solar system's periphery, an unmistakable herald of the cosmic dark matter pirates' arrival. City A, once a thriving metropolis transformed by the Hero Association's headquarters, and the influx of wealth and opportunity that followed, now lay in smoldering ruin. Shattered concrete and twisted steel were piled into ragged hills where skyscrapers had once stood. Only the battered foundations remained, themselves half buried in rubble. The air hung heavy with dust and despair, as though time itself had ground to a halt. In an instant, countless lives had been extinguished. Office workers frozen at their desks, children mid-lesson in their classrooms, families enjoying a quiet evening at home. Laughter, cries, even the faintest quarrels, all were reduced to a haunting silence. Except for the lone tower of the Hero Association's headquarters, every other building in the city was nothing more than a shattered memory. Ethan stood amid the shattered remains of what had once been the city's command center. The building, now little more than a hollow shell, bore deep gouges and fractured supports, scars of the attack it had barely survived. Beyond these ruins, no structure anywhere rose more than 3 meters above ground. The rest lay crushed or flattened. Scattered through the wreckage were the few fortunate souls who had lived while everything fell around them. Some lay trapped beneath tangled girders, others huddled in tiny, hidden pockets of space. But even their luck offered little comfort. With so much debris to clear, finding and rescuing buried survivors was nearly impossible. Above this devastation hovered the true architect of the city's ruin. Ethan craned his neck to take in its colossal form. The alien spacecraft was almost half as long and wide as City A itself, blotting out the sky and sun in one oppressive sweep. Its surface was a deep, light-devouring black, as if it absorbed every stray beam of daylight. Along its underside sprouted clusters of fierce purple crystal spires, monstrous teeth poised to strike. From those jagged protrusions had erupted the supercharged artillery that had laid the city low in a single cataclysmic salvo. Ethan felt the weight of that power pressing down on him. The ship's destructive force was beyond anything he'd ever imagined, and, worst of all, it was still here, poised to unleash it again at any moment. The sudden appearance of the alien craft struck the city like a cataclysmic thunderbolt, reducing entire neighborhoods to rubble and leaving countless people homeless. Are mourning the loss of loved ones. No one knew where the ship had come from or what it intended, and panic rippled through the survivors like a tidal wave of fear. High above the ruined skyline, Esdeath gazed up at the enormous vessel in stunned silence. She was a warrior capable of leveling a city with a single strike, yet this towering structure defied her comprehension. Never before had she laid eyes on anything so vast and clearly engineered by human, or perhaps inhuman hands. For the first time, she found herself utterly amazed. Chapter 488, Immortality Does Not Exist. Esdeath looked up at the sky, her impatience barely contained. Master, is that the powerful being you've been talking about? Ethan nodded gravely. Yes, up there are life forms of unimaginable strength, so formidable that none could hope to challenge them except me. Esdeath raised an eyebrow. Except you? She echoed. He offered her a wry smile. Even Saitama, the bald man everyone keeps talking about, wouldn't qualify as human compared to them. She frowned. He certainly made short work of one of our so-called weirdos. In this world, deadly monsters weren't labeled dangerous species, but simply weirdos. Meaning aside, they were lethally violent. That one made a decent sparring partner, she added dryly. Ethan followed her gaze to the landing platform. The spaceship's hatch creaked open, and a gargantuan figure stepped out, its height rivaling that of a small building. Its body was neither deformed flesh nor any ordinary carbon-based tissue, but rather a mass of gray, rock-like muscle, rippling with stone-hard fibers. Dense ridges ran across its surface like exposed tendons or meridian channels, giving the impression that the creature's very sinews were carved from granite. Despite its monstrous construction, the form was unmistakably humanoid. Broad shoulders, thick arms and legs, and a torso proportioned like a man's, if a man were made of living bedrock. But its head, or heads to be precise, was what chilled them both. 3 of them, each a grotesque fusion of void and mirror. Where flesh and features should have been, there were only black, formless cavities surrounded by facets of glinting, chitin-like plates, reminiscent of insect compound eyes on an impossible scale. Esdeath's lips curled in a half-smirk. 3 heads, huh? That's straight out of someone's worst nightmare. Ethan tightened his grip on the sword at his side. And believe me, he said softly, this is only the beginning. Ethan's voice was steady as he explained. This creature is called Maruza Garudo. It's a formidable monster, but its true danger lies in what amounts to immortality. Immortality? Esdeath's eyes sparkled with excitement. She'd always assumed there was no such thing in this universe. Even Ethan, with his vast knowledge of interstellar threats, had often cautioned against being spooked by any foe claiming invulnerability. After all, true immortality doesn't exist. No matter how powerful a being, there's always a way to destroy it. At best, such boasts were empty. At worst, they masked horrifyingly resilient creatures whose defeats felt more like brutal punishments than victories. Ethan nodded grimly. The cosmic dark matter pirates have an almost laughably simple invasion strategy. First, their ship takes out the planet's observation network, satellites, long-range sensors, everything we rely on for early warning. Then the vessel breaches the atmosphere, and that's when they unleash Maruza Garudo, one of their 3 elite combatants. It heals itself endlessly, thrives in any environment, and adapts to every attack. Even if we manage to destroy one of its clones, it'll resurrect in a century. By then, the pirates will have moved on, or worse, come back stronger. Esdeath drew in a sharp breath, her usual composure challenged by the prospect of facing an apparently unkillable foe. But excitement still danced in her eyes. Even so, she said, we'll find its weakness. There's always a crack in every armor, no matter how many times it mends. Ethan had never lost a single clone, even after facing Boros, and in the past 100 years, he'd actually gained one. As the strongest member of his species, he had no choice but to bend the knee when he met Boros. The Conqueror had discovered Ethan's only weakness, and, rather than kill him, offered a bargain. Ethan would serve him until Boros died of old age. Once Ethan's fleet arrived in orbit, his task was to obliterate every aerial defense and clear the skies for the invasion armada. Then came the orbital bombardment, focused on the planet, its population centers to draw out its greatest warriors, the living embodiments of its martial might. With the planet's top fighters routed or exposed, Boros's ships would intercept and analyze every scrap of communication, pinpointing resistance cells and vital strongholds. When the intelligence network had finished its work, wave after wave of ground forces would descend. Basic infantry, low-tier shock troops, and the elite Tiger Ghost units, while specialist technicians, designated Wolf-level operatives, supported them from behind the lines. Together, they would spread across the planet in coordinated drops, unleashing overwhelming force to crush any hope of organized resistance and secure the world for Boros's empire. The universe's greatest fighters had begun their assault on this planet's advanced inhabitants. If the defenders here failed, Boros, the legendary super being and leader of the rampaging dark matter pirates, would move in and lay everything to waste. Below, the S-class heroes pressed the attack, but they came to an abrupt halt when they spotted someone locked in combat with a creature that barely seemed alive. "These life forms, they're incredibly strong," one hero murmured in disbelief. Meluza Gerudo glared at the ice-cold warrior across from him. "Esdeath." "All right then," he taunted. "Show me your strength." In the next heartbeat, Esdeath unleashed a barrage of devastating blows. Her death fist technique struck like a ferocious storm, each punch wreathed in pale white spirals that drilled into Gerudo's armor. Flesh tore, bones splintered, and explosive bursts of energy detonated on contact, spraying clotted gore across the battlefield. And yet even as his body was shredded and rebuilt in seconds, Gerudo's regeneration refused to slow him down. Amid the chaos, the S-class heroes watched, awed by the relentless display of power, and all too aware that if even Esdeath struggled against these foes, Boros himself might soon have to intervene. It was as if Meluza Gerudo lacked any conventional energy system or cells. Its flesh, no matter how grievously damaged, reformed itself instantly, reshaping to mend the wound. The beast's onslaught never eased. Its limbs had transformed into massive spikes, and smaller barbs erupted from its head and waist, giving it the appearance of a living, explosive hedgehog. But Ethan showed no hesitation. With unwavering resolve, he unleashed the feng shui spiral blade from his right hand. Like the tip of 1,000 wheat-ons, it struck again and again. Bang, bang, bang! The thunderous impacts resonated like a giant tunneling drill smashing into bedrock, rolling over the battlefield in a deafening roar. Drawing upon his Tianyuan breakthrough spiral technique, Ethan channeled his punch power from the earth upward, as though he would shatter the very sky. Even Meluza Gerudo, towering and seemingly invulnerable, crumbled under the assault. Ethan ripped through its spiked limbs, sheared away the thorny armor, and cleaved through stone and mountain alike, driving his blade straight into the creature's heart. In that final, explosive moment, Meluza Gerudo's terrifying form collapsed, and the battlefield fell silent. The moment the spiral force detonated inside Melzagardo, it was like setting off a miniature nuclear bomb within his twisted form. He had meant to contain and crush the strange energy, but it was far too potent. The explosion tore through him in an instant. Boom! Scattering chunks of flesh and sinew across the air. Yet even as his body fell apart, something miraculous and terrifying happened. The shredded tissue began knitting itself back together, layer by layer, as though life itself refused to let him die. Atomic Samurai, EI Steel, Silverfang Bang, and the others arrived on the scene just in time to witness the grotesque regeneration. They exchanged startled glances. They'd known Esdeath's true allegiance ever since Bang's report, but this was something else entirely. Esdeath stepped forward, her breath crystallizing in the cold air. "No, he's not merely regenerating," she corrected, voice as crisp as ice. "He's reshaping himself." With a decisive flick of her blade, she unleashed an instant freeze, encasing the reassembling tissues in an unbreakable sheath of frost. The sudden halt in reconstruction revealed Melzagardo's greatest secret. At the heart of his shattered body lay a polished orb of deep red, glowing like a captured sun. That crimson core pulsed relentlessly, its light throbbing in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. Whatever power it held, they now knew where it lay, and that knowledge might be their only hope of stopping Melzagardo once and for all. Chapter 489. Esdeath sweeps the land. Ethan becomes a tourist. Esdeath sneered, her hand enveloped in swirling frost as she zeroed in on Meluza Gerudo's hidden core. Without touching it directly, she unleashed a concentrated blast of cold that instantly crystallized around the vital nucleus. Then came the sound of ice shattering. Meluza Gerudo's core fractured under the pressure. A tortured scream ripped from his throat. Staggering back, Maruzagarudo's eyes filled with disbelief and despair. The core had housed his personality for over a century. It was his life. "No, there has to be another way," he cried, clutching at his chest. Esdeath cocked her head, examining the broken fragments. "So that was the secret," she said coldly. "The true key lies within the body itself." Behind her, the atomic samurai and the others charged forward, eager to finish the fight. Esdeath waved them off with a flick of her wrist. She had no intention of sharing this triumph. Instead, she pivoted gracefully and returned her attention to Ethan, her eyes burning with approval. "Well done," she praised, her voice smooth as ice. "I thought it would take you far longer to locate the core." Ethan allowed himself a modest smile. He'd known Esdeath's combat instincts were sharp enough to spot the core in an instant. That was why he deliberately withheld the truth, letting her discover the secret on her own to sharpen her strategic mind. Yet even he hadn't expected her to deduce so quickly that Maruzagarudo's regeneration was actually a process of molecular reconstruction, not true healing. With the core destroyed, all of Maruzagarudo's restorative abilities were rendered useless. The battlefield fell silent, except for the hiss of dissipating frost and the survivors' ragged breaths. Esdeath's victory was absolute, and across the land, rumor of her icy conquest would soon spread like wildfire. Ethan watched her, pride swelling in his chest. For a moment, the weight of the victory lifted, and he wondered where their journey might take them next, perhaps to distant cities, where he could finally indulge his curiosity and become a tourist. None of the other S-Class heroes had ever distinguished between the two alien devices, but Esdeath saw it instantly. She pinpointed the heart of the reconstruction mechanism and smiled with quiet triumph. "Ethan," she said, eyes bright with anticipation, "are we heading for that spaceship next?" Before he could answer, Tornado drifted into view, arms folded, her emerald aura flickering around her like distant lightning. She'd felt an unsettling danger radiating from Esdeath and this newcomer, especially after witnessing Esdeath dispatch a platoon of aliens with chilling ease. "Wait, who are you?" Tornado demanded, voice echoing in the ruined plaza. "Just a passing traveler," Ethan replied with a languid shrug. In the blink of an eye, he and Esdeath vanished, phasing straight through the battered hull and into the ship's dimly lit corridors. Back on the surface, Saitama was already cutting a path of destruction through the remaining alien scouts. Every time he worried the ship might bombard Earth again, he launched himself headlong into battle, and wherever he went, debris and alien bodies littered the ground. A mental ping from Ethan pulled him back. Saitama skidded to a halt, pivoted and bounded off in the opposite direction, toward the residential quarters where the rookie fighters had holed up. Deep inside the spaceship, Ethan strolled at an easy pace, hands tucked into his coat. Esdeath fell into step at his side, her blade at the ready. "From here on," Ethan said, voice low and confident, "we depend on each other." With that, they pressed onward, ready to unravel the alien core and whatever other secrets lay hidden in the heart of this invasion. Esdeath barely glanced at the dozen fighters swarming the corridor. With a casual flick of her wrist, jagged shards of ice shot from her gauntlet, encasing them in shimmering prisons. Satisfied, she turned back toward the broken viewport. Below, the colossal six-armed octopus Goryuganshup writhed in panic. His once pristine starship groaned under mounting damage. Already over 30% of its hull was gone. "How can these beings be so powerful?" he raged in his mind. "They've struck the domain of higher life forms without even flinching." A thunderous roar erupted in Esdeath's skull. She froze, hand to her temple. "Telepathic intrusion," Ethan said softly at her side. "Goryuganshup's trying to command you." Esdeath's lips curved into a confident smirk. "I was beginning to think he had no mental control powers, or that they simply aren't effective against me." She tapped her gauntlet once more. "Stand down, Ethan." "Shh," she cautioned, raising a finger to silence him. Before they could exchange another word, the wall beside them exploded outward. A monstrous figure clawed its way through the breach, a towering alien with mottled dark green skin. Jagged rows of teeth ringed the crown of its skull and the backs of its twisted, knotted hands, grotesque mouths forever poised to devour. It let out a guttural growl, muscles rippling, ready to charge. Esdeath's eyes gleamed with icy resolve as she prepared for the next wave of attack. Chapter 7. The Challenge of Lord Glorabos. Ethan's senses prickled as a deep, resonant voice rolled through the cavernous hall. "It must be Glorabos," he murmured, his eyes narrowing. Glorabos was the first of the legendary top three, an elite trio of fighters rumored to dwarf even Melzagardo in sheer power and skill. Rumor had it he wielded over 20 unique abilities, chief among them the dreaded Acid Spit. Before Ethan could issue a warning, a cavernous roar shattered the stillness. "Intruders! You dare trespass into the domain of Lord Glorabos?" The alien lord lunged forward, jaws opening wide as he unleashed a jet of searing, fluorescent green acid. Ethan braced for the worst. He'd seen alien corrosives before, but this blast scorched faster and burned hotter than anything he'd encountered. He raised his arm, expecting the acid to cling and dissolve flesh in moments, but nothing happened. The acid beam wavered in midair, then crystallized, turning into jagged ice shards that tinkled harmlessly onto the cracked stone floor. Ethan caught his breath, astonished. Standing beside him, Esdeath remained perfectly still, saw her cerulean eyes gleaming. A faint, enigmatic smile curved her lips, but she offered no spell, no barrier, no motion of any kind. Ethan glanced at her, baffled by her confidence. Across the hall, Glorabos recoiled, disbelief etched on every ridged contour of his alien face. "What trickery is this?" he snarled, claws flexing as a crackling fury built in his throat. He reared back and spat again, this time even more acid than before, determined to overwhelm them. Yet still, Esdeath stood unmoved, as though daring him to try his worst. Ethan stepped forward, heart pounding. Whatever plan she had in mind, he was ready to follow her lead, and witness firsthand how the Empire's fiercest ice sorceress would counter the greatest acid-breathing warrior in the galaxy. All the corrosive acid hanging in the air froze in an instant, then shattered as it crashed onto the deck. Goryuganship's sensors whirred in confusion. "Is that the extent of this one's power?" asked. Before it could react, Esdeath twisted into a spiraling dash and reappeared behind the towering Glorabos. With a single thrust, she rammed a vortex of spiraling force straight into its back, ice magic coiling around that blow like a blooming frost. The monster erupted into a shower of crystalline fragments, exploding outward like a fiery firework. "This way," Esdeath called. Ethan strode forward without hesitation, Esdeath at his heels. Goryuganship's console lit up with panic. "What? Glorabos, annihilated in the blink of an eye?" Hardly had the words left its mouth when Melzagardo's readings blinked out too. 2 of the ship's 3 top champions had vanished, and the unknown life form responsible was closing in. A chill settled through Goryuganship's circuitry. Could the ancient prophecy be unfolding before its very eyes? It recalled the legend. 3 invaders would breach the vessel, one bald and seemingly weak, a boy and a woman. Perhaps the hairless one was meant only to clear out the lesser defenses. That would explain its deep penetration. But these 2, this confident man and woman, were clearly the true powerhouses of their world. They advanced together, unshakable. Goryuganship powered up its final defenses, vents hissing as it prepared for the assault it had long hoped to prevent. Goryuganship snarled, refusing to admit defeat. In an instant, Ethan and Esdeath materialized before the great cephalopod's writhing mass of tentacles. "Tell me," Goryuganship rumbled, its many eyes narrowing, "are you the most powerful life forms on this planet?" No one had ever addressed Saitama with such deference. His unassuming presence led onlookers to dismiss him as weak. Even when he flattened a dragon-tier monster with a single punch, witnesses would murmur that the beast had to be feeble. Ethan and Esdeath, by contrast, radiated authority. As a reigning queen, Esdeath carried herself with regal confidence, and though Ethan was nothing more than an adventurer here, his aura crackled with unshakable dominance. Ethan gave a half-smile, his gaze cool and unwavering. "That's about right, little octopus." Goryuganship's tentacles stiffened in fury. "How dare you lump me in with the lowliest creatures on your world?" In the sudden silence that followed, the tension crackled like electricity, 2 incomparable forces poised on the brink of clash. Chapter 490, Transformed into a Figurine. Ethan stood on the rocky plain, staring up at the hulking form of Lord Goryuganship. Word of the dark matter pirate warlord's telekinetic might had spread across galaxies, yet facing him in person was still unsettling. Goryu Ganshup was one of the 3 top fighters in the universe Dark Matter Pirates, and by his own boast, the greatest telekinetic in existence. "You Earth creatures," Goryu Ganshup rumbled, his voice echoing like distant thunder. "You see octopuses scuttling along the ocean floor and think them mere animals, but I recognize them for what they truly are, distant cousins from a distant world," he sneered. "Yet you humans refuse to admit the truth. If I claimed monkeys and apes were our kin, you'd laugh in my face." Ethan clenched his fists. He'd learned by now not to argue philosophy with an alien ruler. Instead, he watched as a shard of cracked basalt hovered between Goryu Ganshup's massive hands, suspended purely by will. "Let me show you how powerful Lord Goryu Ganshup truly is," the warlord announced. With a subtle gesture, he compressed the fragment, twisting gravity around it until the rock imploded, vanishing in a silent flash. Ethan's heart pounded. In countless holoreels, he'd seen Goryu Ganshup collapse stars and summon miniature black holes. Yet none of it prepared him for the raw force before him now. "You think you can stand against me?" Goryu Ganshup scoffed, his eyes glittering with contempt. Without warning, he extended his telekinetic grasp toward Ethan. Instantly, the air around Ethan thickened, pressing in from every direction. Pain lanced through Ethan's limbs as if invisible hands were cramping his muscles. "Ethan!" he gasped, but no sound escaped. His vision blurred and darkened at the edges. Within seconds it was over. Ethan's body stopped convulsing, and then, impossibly, he shrank. Within a heartbeat, he'd been reduced to a hand-sized statuette of gleaming ivory, frozen in mid-stride. The cold wind whipped around the tiny figurine, but it could not move. Goryu Ganshup crouched and picked it up, inspecting his handiwork. "A mere plaything," he muttered, turning the figurine over in his palm. "Amusing." He studied Ethan's frozen expression, shock mixed with defiance, and smiled. A ripple of movement behind him heralded the arrival of 2 lieutenants. One nodded respectfully. "My lord, inquiries persist. Can you truly open a black hole with your powers?" Goryu Ganshup's grin widened. "Black holes are child's play compared to my will, but some mysteries I reserve for Teacher One's guidance." He set the figurine down atop a jagged boulder. "Leave me." The lieutenants bowed and withdrew. Alone again, Goryu Ganshup turned his gaze to the horizon, where distant storms churned. "No one has withstood me, not even Saitama, the so-called invincible." His laughter rolled across the plain, "and now this Earth boy shall spend eternity as a trinket in my collection." But deep within the porcelain figure, Ethan's spirit burned bright. Invisible to Goryu Ganshup, a single thought echoed: "This isn't over." Though trapped in statuette form, Ethan vowed he would find a way back to full strength, and when he did, the true battle would begin. Ethan watched in awe as Goryu Ganshup prepared to unleash another devastating throw. Unlike Tornado, whose incredible strength still can't overcome the air resistance that tears apart a speeding projectile, Goryu Ganshup's mastery of telekinesis actually nullifies the friction between air and stone. With no drag to slow it down, the boulder accelerated toward its target at nearly light speed. "You see," Ethan murmured to the others, "if Tornado tried to throw like that, the air pressure alone would evaporate the rock the instant it left his hand. He's powerful, but his throws have a clear speed limit. Goryu Ganshup, on the other hand, is in a league of his own, truly the universe's premier telekinetic." Even so, Ethan couldn't help a wry smile. He'd seen Saitama swat Goryu Ganshup aside with a single, casual stone lob. To him, Godspeed projectile, though terrifying to most, felt almost laughably ordinary. Later, during the livestream Q&A, a fan asked, if Glorabas, Melzagardo, and Goryu Ganshup joined forces, could they defeat Monster King Orochi? Ethan read the answer aloud. With perfectly coordinated strategy, they might stand a slim chance, but it's still highly unlikely. After all, we don't even know whether Tornado herself could face Orochi head-on. The stream cut back to an illustration of the 3 villains standing together, the air around them crackling with raw power. Ethan leaned forward, eyes gleaming. "In this world," he said softly, "even the strongest alliance can crumble if you underestimate your opponent." Goryu Ganshup's strength was formidable, far more than one would guess from someone who simply bent stones with telekinesis. In a way, it echoed humanity's most basic skills, boiling water and hurling rocks, but this was far deadlier. The stone she launched wasn't just fast, it was traveling at sublight speed. A single strike could have killed Esdeath instantly, and Esdeath had no inkling of the danger. Goryuganship, of course, wasn't about to warn her. With a graceful flourish, Esdeath summoned a blade of ice, hoping to probe her opponent's power. But before she could strike, Goryuganship spoke. "Take this," and twisted the very gravity around Esdeath. In an instant, Esdeath's limbs felt as though they carried lead weights. She sank to her knees under the crushing force. She hadn't endured pressure like this in centuries. Goryuganship's voice rang out, cold and triumphant. "My telekinesis can bend gravity itself, so strong that not even light can escape. Prepare to perish, Earthling." Then, with ruthless precision, Goryuganship shattered Esdeath's ice blade, seized the fragments, and flung them outward at sublight velocity, effectively eliminating all air resistance in their path. The spinning shards became a deadly hailstorm, careening back toward Esdeath. As the lethal projectiles bore down on her, Ethan sprang forward without hesitation, positioning himself between Esdeath and the oncoming storm, ready to shield her from a blow that would otherwise be unsurvivable. Esdeath blinked in surprise as the ice barrier before her simply dissolved. She knew at once who was responsible, her master, Captain Ethan. A chill ran down her spine. Had he decided this opponent was too dangerous for her to handle alone? "Master, what just happened?" she called out. Across the field, Goryuganship reeled from the invisible assault. He'd mastered sublight speed attacks, but that didn't mean he could dodge them. Only a being truly capable of moving at sublight velocities could react fast enough, and Goryuganship was nowhere near that level. He shook his massive head. "It seems this adversary is beyond your abilities, Esdeath." Ethan stepped forward, expression unruffled. "Esdeath, describe what you saw." She hurried to his side. He unleashed an attack at sublight speed, too fast for any defense. If it hadn't failed, it would have annihilated territory hundreds of times the size of our empire. Ethan turned to face the stunned alien. "I didn't expect an Earthling to recognize my technique." Goryuganship's mandibles twitched in shock. "Your move. It's reckless. It bends gravity itself, but it's astonishing." He paused, confusion flickering in his multifaceted eyes. Had the universal translator garbled sublight, or had the mental link scrambled his understanding? Whatever the case, Goryuganship knew one thing for certain. They just witnessed power on a scale neither of them had ever seen before. Ethan's lips curved into a faint smile. "So you think he's dangerous, yet he's good?" Before anyone could answer, he simply raised a finger. "Turn into a toy." This was no mere transformation spell, but pure reality-warping power, and it worked instantly. Goryuganship hadn't even had time to react before he was frozen in place, shrunk down, and reshaped into a little puppet doll. Ethan tucked the toy away in his coat pocket. He was still mastering the Joker King's techniques, but already the power felt, if not natural, at least under his control. As a child, he'd found the Joker King's abilities overwhelming, even despairing. Now, wielding them himself, he felt strangely calm. Someday, he thought, if he ever visited the worlds of Marvel or DC, he could unleash that doll and watch Goryuganship's chaos unfold across their Earth. Beside him, Esdeath's eyes were wide with astonishment. She'd commanded legions of soldiers, wielded ice and heartless cruelty. But she'd never seen anything like this. What sort of being was her master? How many powers did he still have lurking beneath the surface? Were there any limits at all? "We should move on," Ethan said. "Our next stop is to see the owner of this place." He led Esdeath out of the abandoned control room. They walked down a long, dimly lit corridor until they came to an enormous door, easily tens of meters tall and almost as wide. Intricate, circuit-like patterns were etched across its metal surface, glowing with pulsing energy. Clearly, whatever lay beyond was still active and waiting for them. In the center of the massive door sat a single, stylized eye, clearly a decorative pattern, not a living organ. Even from the outside, the sheer scale of the portal announced what lay beyond. This chamber belonged to Boros, and it was the largest room on the entire ship, reserved for its formidable captain alone. Esdeath tilted her head, curiosity gleaming in her eyes. "Is the owner of this vessel a colossal creature?" she mused. From any human perspective, doors are usually sized to fit their occupants, except in grand structures like the Xuanwu Gate, so it was only natural she'd assume a giant must lie behind such an enormous threshold. Not at all. Ethan replied with a small smile. Unlike Saitama's dramatic entry, he and Esdeath had barely taken a step forward before the door began to unlock itself. Thin, black filaments etched along its upper rim pulsed with latent energy, and the carved eye flared to life. With a low hum, the portal smoothly slid open, revealing the vast chamber within. Chapter 491. Prepare for the Shock of Knowledge. Ethan and Esdeath, both confident and skilled, stepped into the chamber without hesitation. The vast room was almost unbearably sparse. Cold metal pillars rose on either side, and nothing adorned the walls. The only notable feature was a high platform at the far end, its tiered seats backed by rows of softly glowing transistors and pulsating crystals. Perched alone upon the highest seat was a dark figure. Esdeath halted, studying him closely. The enormous doorway they'd passed through suddenly made sense. It had to be built large enough to admit this being. His frame suggested a roughly humanoid shape, but the similarities ended there. A dense, perfectly rounded afro crowned his head, so voluminous and rigid that even the baldest of devils might envy its firmness. Below that mane lay a face more terrifying than any monster's, a single, horizontal eye stretching across the upper half of his visage, where a pair of eyes and a forehead should have been. Ethan and Esdeath exchanged a glance. They'd heard rumors of Boros's power and strangeness, but nothing could have prepared them for this. The hush of the chamber fell away as they resolved to confront the figure before them and brace themselves for whatever revelation lay ahead. Esdeath's eyes locked onto the alien warlord, and she felt a chill crawl down her spine. Black veins crawled outward from the creature's single, glowing eye, giving his face an uncanny, almost grotesque appearance. In manga or animation, Boros had always looked fearsome, but seeing him in person was something else entirely. The armor he wore was outrageously ornate. Massive pauldrons bristling with spikes, forearm guards that flared outward like wicked claws, and matching curved boots that gleamed under the arena lights. Esdeath could see no practical purpose in any of it, only intimidation. Wherever the plating fell away, his skin revealed a deep purple hue streaked with darker veins, and across his chest sat a pulsating red orb. More purple markings raced across his abdomen and arms in bold, tribal-like patterns. Around his waist he wore white, billowing shorts secured by a magenta belt, from which hung a short, curved blade of purple steel, its edge inlaid with silver. Unbeknownst to Esdeath, the ornate armor served two deadly functions. It suppressed Boros's true power, and it generated a crushing gravity field to restrain the sheer force of his attacks. Every swing of his fist, every kick, was effectively weighed down by tens of thousands of tons. Boros jokingly called it, taking it easy. For one such as he, most materials shattered under even a fraction of his strength. As Esdeath studied him warily, Boros's single eye flicked back and forth, taking in both her and her companion with equal intensity. A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant roar of the crowd and the promise of the battle to come. Ethan possessed an extraordinary, race-born spiritual power, a vast internal reservoir of energy, and his senses were so finely tuned that he could detect the faintest ripple of power around him. Among the countless alien species he'd studied, none fascinated him more than the Boros. Native to a planet whose environment was relentlessly hostile, the Boros had evolved as beings of living energy. They competed for survival in conditions that would kill most life forms outright, and as a result, they developed what many considered the universe's greatest healing ability. If a human might perish from a mortal wound in seconds, a Boros could focus his life force and fully regenerate in that time. Rumors even whispered that the Boros were not just an exceptionally hardy species, but mutants on the order of King Frieza of the Frost Demon Clan, beings whose energy essence made them effectively immortal. Ethan had grand designs for his twin empires of Mars and Venus. He wanted a private legion of extraordinary warriors, and the Boros topped his list. He deemed Kryptonians too unpredictable, far too unnatural, and prone to catastrophic failures. Saiyans and Cyclopean tribes could be molded into fierce soldiers, but the Boros' innate energy sensitivity offered something unique. They could assess an opponent's strength simply by feeling the magnitude of energy coursing through their bodies. In his mind's eye, Ethan envisioned a phalanx of Boros subordinates, each capable of leaping into battle, sizing up foes at a glance and healing from battlefield injuries in the blink of an eye. With their alliance secured, the empires of Mars and Venus would command a power unrivaled anywhere in the galaxy. In the Dragon Ball universe, visual readings of someone's power can be even more precise than a scouter. Whether that perception works on a cellular level or something more subtle, I can't say. From Boros's vantage point, Esdeath's aura shimmered with three interwoven energies, brilliant reds and deep blues that coiled around one another. It was undeniably vast, certainly enough to overwhelm Maluza Gerudo and Gloribas, but still nowhere near the level required to challenge Goryu Ganshupu. Standing beside her was Ethan, composed, hands clasped behind his back, his expression unreadable. Boros searched in vain for any power signature. There was nothing. That absence spoke volumes. Only someone utterly beyond imagination could cloak himself so completely. No wonder Goryu Ganshop had fallen at his hands. "Welcome aboard my ship," Boros said, his voice echoing off the metal bulkheads. He stepped down from the bridge, each footstrike ringing out like a hammer blow. Ethan felt the vessel groan under unimaginable pressure, tens of thousands of tons distributed through its struts, and yet Boros's control was so precise that his boots barely dented the deck. Incredible. Boros halted a few feet away, eyes never leaving Ethan's face. "Before we begin our duel, allow me to introduce myself properly." Ethan stood where he'd been summoned, flanked by Esdeath, as a colossal figure strode toward him. Moonlight glinted off the intruder's armor, but it was the sheer force of his presence that made even Esdeath hesitate. "I am Boros," the stranger declared, voice resonating like a war horn, "leader of the Dark Matter Pirates, overlord of the universe." He stopped a few paces from Ethan and reached out a gauntleted hand. "Ethan." Ethan met his gaze and inclined his head. So the prophecy was true. Boros cracked a wide grin, eyes alight with excitement. True enough to lead me on the most exhilarating hunt of my life. For centuries I've burned, killed, and conquered every world that dared stand in my way. No one has ever offered me a fight worthy of my strength. It became tedious. He turned slightly, addressing both Esdeath and the silent soldiers arrayed behind him. 20 years ago, a wandering fortune-teller spoke of a distant planet called Earth. He claimed warriors there could finally challenge me on equal footing. My crew thought it was a mere fairy tale, a scam to keep us chasing ghosts, but I believed. Just enough to set course for this system. Boros closed the distance until his armor dwarfed Ethan's silhouette. He scented no fear in the young man's stance, only calm confidence. All this time, I wondered if the prophecy was a lie. Yet here you stand, and I feel it now, the power coursing through you that no one else has wielded. He drew in a deep breath, savoring the moment. "Ethan, prepare yourself. I've come all this way for a battle that will shake the foundations of the universe." As silence fell, even Esdeath sensed it, the calm before a storm unlike any they'd ever witnessed. Boros leaned back, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Honestly, this beats facing yet another being with godlike power. I came here for a little excitement. Bring it on." Boros raised a hand. "Wait, before you do that, I've got a question." Ethan turned to him, curiosity sparking at the corner of his lips. "Go ahead." Boros hesitated for a moment, then pressed on. "You said it took you 20 years to reach Earth. In that time, how many inhabited worlds have you conquered? Have you ever even left the Milky Way, overlord of the universe?" Ethan's grin widened. "More than 1,000 planets now bow to me." Boros shook his head. "Do you realize how vast the universe really is?" Ethan tilted his head. "I'm not sure what you mean." "There are hundreds of millions of stars in our galaxy alone," Boros explained. "Each could host countless civilizations. 1,000 worlds? That's just a drop in the ocean if you never ventured beyond our spiral arm." Ethan raised an eyebrow and snapped his fingers. Instantly, a glowing holographic map of the Milky Way appeared before them, its countless star systems tracing luminous arcs across the void. Chapter 492, Boros's Shock and Determination. Boros stared at the star map before him, vast beyond imagination. "Humans estimate about 300 billion observable stars in the Milky Way," he read aloud, voice barely above a whisper. "Of those, roughly 200 billion have been catalogued. But in reality, our galaxy may hold nearly 600 billion stars. Even if only 1 in a million of those stars hosts a planet capable of life, That's still an astronomical number. His eyes widened as the holographic display stretched out into infinity. Born on a world whose sky boasted only a few nearby suns, Boros's grasp of the cosmos had never extended far beyond his home planet and its immediate stellar neighbors. Now, confronted with this sprawling starfield, he felt both awed and overwhelmed. 600 billion stars, he murmured, hardly believing the tally. His entire race amounted to just a few thousand individuals. The idea that a single galaxy could contain millions of times more stars than his people made his heart pound. Ethan watched Boros's reaction carefully. He offered a small, reassuring smile. "Those numbers are just rough estimates," he said. "The true count could be somewhat higher, or it could be lower. Our knowledge is still incomplete." Boros exhaled slowly, trying to absorb the enormity of it all. Despite the uncertainty, one fact pressed itself on his mind with crystal clarity. Whether it was 300 billion or 600 billion, the universe was far larger and far more mysterious than he had ever imagined. And now that he'd glimpsed even a fraction of it, there was no turning back. Ethan floated a hollow star map above the conference table and tapped at a point deep in the spiral arm. "Even 1,000 conquered worlds," he said evenly, "would barely register in the Milky Way. From my vantage, the figure is effectively 0. Esdeath leaned in, her frost-kissed gaze fixed on the swirling galaxies. Boros drew in a shaky breath, struggling to process Ethan's words. His pulse quickened as the enormity of the cosmos crystallized before him, so vast that everything he'd done felt suddenly insignificant. "When I speak of the center of the universe," Ethan continued, voice calm but uncompromising, "or claim the title Universe Overlord, I'm not indulging in hyperbole. Do you even grasp what it means to be at the universe's core?" A tense silence followed. Boros, once so supremely confident, felt his convictions unravel. He had believed his own race to be the pinnacle of creation, with himself as its greatest champion. All those victories now seemed like peering at the stars from the bottom of a well. At last, Boros lifted his head. His voice wavered. "I always thought my people were the universe's center, and that I was its strongest being." Ethan's expression remained unflinching. "Then your understanding is overdue for an upgrade." He swept a hand across the hologram, revealing far more worlds, billions, perhaps trillions, spreading out into the velvet blackness. Boros stared at the display, every heartbeat reminding him how narrow his former vision had been. Ethan's lips curved into a faint, knowing smile as he tapped the holographic star chart floating between them. "First, no race can claim to be the universe's center. It's immeasurably vast. Each civilization is little more than a speck of dust." He swept a hand across the map, and the familiar pinwheels of the Milky Way dissolved into a far grander spiral. "You may be the strongest in your own galaxy, but across the cosmos you're insignificant. The universe is expanding all the time. There is no fixed center. Even if you want to talk about the center of civilization, what grounds do you have for such a claim? We've barely mapped a fraction of existence." The star chart shifted again, this time revealing an extragalactic Leviathan, a galaxy far larger than the Milky Way, its billions upon billions of stars glimmering like molten jewels. "Extragalactic galaxies," Ethan continued, voice calm but firm, "are systems that lie beyond our own, each one composed of billions or even hundreds of billions of stars, nebulae, and interstellar matter. If you can't grasp what lies outside your immediate sphere of influence, how can you insist you're supreme?" He paused, letting the enormity of the unveiled galaxy sink in. "In this infinite expanse, true power isn't measured by dominion over a single star system, but by the wisdom to know just how small we really are." Ethan leaned forward, eyes bright with excitement. "Most galaxies beyond our own span, anywhere from a few thousand to 100,000 light-years in diameter, many are actually more voluminous than the Milky Way. Astronomers group these extragalactic systems by shape into 3 main categories: elliptical, spiral, and irregular. Every one of them is in motion, their positions scattered unevenly across the cosmos, and they tend to gather in clusters. In fact, our Milky Way and more than 30 neighboring galaxies form a cluster known as the local group. So far, we've cataloged billions of galaxies outside our own. Among the best known are the Andromeda Galaxy, the Canes-Venatici Galaxy, the Large and Small Magellanic Clouds, and the Virgo Galaxy. He paused, letting the enormity of those numbers sink in. Then he added, and beyond individual galaxies and their clusters lies an even grander structure, the Laniakea supercluster. This vast collection spans roughly 520 million light-years and contains thousands of galaxy clusters and groups, our local group included. Ethan's star chart swelled until it dominated the entire chamber, its luminous lines tracing the vast web of galaxies that surrounded them. Boros stared in stunned silence as Ethan began to speak. Take the Laniakea supercluster, Ethan said, gesturing at the intricate filaments on the map. It's a colossal structure of overlapping galaxy clusters and groups, all bound together by gravity. Its shape is an elongated sheet, with a densely packed core teeming with galaxies, and dark matter we can't even see. In sheer mass and size, it's one of the largest formations in the cosmos. He tapped the map again, and it zoomed in, revealing a smaller concentration of points. And that's just one example. We're constantly uncovering new cosmic leviathans. Recent observations suggest our own Milky Way is part of an even grander assembly, the local supercluster. It spans roughly 100 million light-years and holds thousands of galaxies. Boros finally found his voice. So what? Even if you conquer the Milky Way, you'd still be nothing more than a small-time galactic overlord. Calling yourself a universal tyrant is pure arrogance. With today's technology, even if you could travel at light speed, you'd need untold millennia just to leave our galaxy. Ethan smiled, his eyes cool and steady. Exactly. Our lifespans are finite. To declare yourself an invincible ruler of all creation is nothing more than shouting claims in a corner of your own territory. The universe is far grander and far more unknowable than any one being could ever conquer. Ethan's voice rang out like a thunderclap in the silent hold. You must understand, once you step beyond this ship, you'll face untold billions of life forms. Among them are super beings who could match you blow for blow, and there are ultimate entities who could snuff you out without a second thought. Boros staggered back, his composure shattered by the colossal star chart Ethan had just revealed, an intricate web of worlds and civilizations stretching across the entire vessel. He stared at it in dumb disbelief. All of that? The universe is that vast. Esdeath's lips curled in fascination, her gaze drifting as if she could already see endless battlefields filled with warriors of unimaginable power. So that's it. The cosmos is boundless. Ha! Boros threw his head back and laughed, a wild, unsteady sound born of sheer shock. He felt like a man who'd crawled out of a well to look up at the sky for the first time, blissfully unaware of the heaven's true scale, convinced until this very moment that his well was the entire Elde. Now, confronted with Ethan's star chart, he might as well have been Emperor Qin Shi Huang, shown a modern map of every land on Earth by a time traveler. Ethan stood at the edge of the observation platform, gazing out at the sea of stars. The universe stretched before him in every direction, immeasurable, unending. He closed his fist, determination blazing in his eyes. This cosmos is vast beyond imagining, he breathed. There must be countless formidable warriors out there. He lifted his head, voice firm. I'll conquer galaxy after galaxy and become the true sovereign of the universe. My name will echo on every world. A fierce spark danced in his gaze. It was clear that this alien realm had ignited a fire in his heart, one that would burn brighter than any star. Chapter 493, Battle. Ethan didn't even pause to answer. He already understood just how vast and dangerous the path before him was. Countless formidable foes scattered across the cosmos, each waiting for their turn to be conquered. He'd lingered here far too long, dulling his senses with petty raids and arson. What a waste of the precious years he had left. He should have set out earlier, hunting true warriors instead of squandering his life on trivial plunder. He straightened his shoulders, a slight smile curling at the corner of his mouth. Perhaps this was the hallmark of a true martial spirit, or of those who live for nothing but the thrill of battle. No measure of cosmic grandeur could intimidate them. Instead, it fueled their excitement. So many powerful enemies lay ahead. We'll begin with Earth, Ethan declared, resolve burning bright in his eyes. Beside him, Boros clenched his fists, determination hardening within. He had no intention of stopping at one world. After Earth fell, he would press on, sweeping across the galaxy. His mind was sharp, his intelligence formidable. A single glance at Ethan's star chart had imprinted its coordinates into his memory, errors and all. But precision was a luxury he could set aside. Remaining idle here was unthinkable. With a low, eager growl, Boros readied himself for war on a cosmic scale. Like the great explorers of old, Ethan, now captain of the dark matter pirates, stood on the bridge of his ship, ready to venture beyond familiar space. Who would want to remain stuck in some backwater outpost like Sea High when the Grand Line lay open for conquest? His voice rang out with unwavering resolve and a fighting spirit that set the crew's hearts racing. He knew Earth was nothing more than the first stepping stone on his path to galactic domination. Countless worlds lay ahead, waiting for him to claim them. Armed with his strength and cunning, he would challenge alien life forms, topple any powerful foe, and carve out his name among the stars. "Don't fail me now, champions of Earth," he called, eyes blazing. Across the deck, Poros's own eyes sparkled with anticipation. He too relished the coming trials. He trusted that Earth's greatest warriors would rise to meet Ethan's challenge, serving as the first true adversaries in his quest, and fueling his drive to reach ever greater heights. He longed to test himself against them, to discover his limits and prove his worth amid endless battle. In that moment, ecstasy and excitement surged through Poros's heart, for the real journey was only just beginning. Ethan's ambition and courage had thrown open the doors to a boundless cosmos, one teeming with foes more formidable than any he'd yet faced. He understood that his path of battle and discovery would never truly end. Yet instead of fear, exhilaration flooded him. Only by confronting these challenges could he unearth his true worth. He fixed the towering alien overlord with unshakable calm. "Impressive. Your resolve meets the bare minimum of a would-be universal overlord. But that's all it is, barely. The universe is vast, and legions of warriors dream of the same throne you crave. Many vie for that power, but only one will seize it." Before Ethan could blink, Boros vanished in a flash. In the next heartbeat, the behemoth reappeared at blinding speed, mere feet away. Their eyes locked, bloodthirsty, war-hungry, and utterly indifferent to mercy, yet beneath it all burned a mutual, pure love of combat. Ethan didn't hesitate. He let his fist fly with all the force he'd ever summoned. Normal punch. The impact exploded like a starburst, tearing through the air in a deafening shockwave. Ethan's blow hammered into Boros's armor, metal groaning under the sudden, brutal assault. Shards of stone and flashes of light roared through the chamber, so thunderous they nearly drowned out every other sound. Boros's massive body was blasted backward, slamming into a towering steel pillar. The pillar buckled and then exploded under the force of the impact, but seconds later, Boros rose unharmed from the rubble. The gleaming armor that once covered him lay in shattered fragments on the floor. In its place, a single, enormous eye glowed in the center of his chest, an eerie counterpart to the one on his face, as if the two shared a direct link to his senses. Boros inhaled deeply, relief and exhilaration swirling in his voice. "My sealing armor. It's gone." He flexed, exposing sculpted blue muscles that rippled with newly unleashed power. A feral grin spread across his face. "Across all the worlds I've conquered, I've never faced an enemy capable of breaking my seals with one blow, and by the name of your move, Ethan, that was simply the random fist?" As if on cue, his energy flared to dizzying heights. Even Ezdieth, normally impervious to ki, stumbled backward under the oppressive pressure of his power. Somewhere in the stunned crowd, a low murmur drifted through the dust. "Oh, really?" "Go ahead, take it off. I don't mind," Ethan said evenly, as if Boros's fearsome reputation meant nothing to him. Boros's lips curled into a snarl, then in an instant he was upon Ethan, moving so fast he left only a streak of blue in the air. Ethan didn't flinch. He tightened his stance and swung his fist. The impact was like thunder crashing. A shockwave ripped outward, hurling rubble and dust in every direction. Ethan's face remained impassive, but Boros froze, a flicker of genuine surprise in his eyes. Ethan hadn't summoned any supernatural power, just pure, unadorned strength, but at that moment it felt as though he'd struck a mountain. In truth, the force drove back not only his fist, but his entire body, as if an avalanche had crashed full-on into him, pinning him in place. Ethan cracked a half-smile. "Is that really all you've got?" The battlefield seemed to tremble around them. Their clash was like two gale-force winds colliding, each successive blow carving spiraling vortices through the air. Ethan's gaze burned with calm intensity. Gathering himself, he unleashed another punch, the sound of wind and thunder heralding its path straight toward Boros. Boros vanished in an instant, leaving only a lingering afterimage in the air. His speed was lightning fast and completely unpredictable, yet Ethan seemed to anticipate it. In a single fluid motion he pivoted, reappearing directly in front of Boros. Midair, their eyes met like two sharpened blades, sending invisible sparks flying. A flicker of surprise crossed Boros's face, quickly replaced by cold resolve. He lunged, a streak of cerulean energy racing toward Ethan. The wind sighed as his fist cut through it, striking Ethan squarely in the chest. The impact rang out like a snapping branch, but Ethan didn't flinch. Instead, a playful smile curled at the corner of his lips. With effortless grace, Ethan flipped his palm upward to catch Boros's blow. Their powers collided, waves hammering against solid rock, sending ripples of force in every direction. Yet Ethan's strength seemed inexhaustible. Boros's energy slid along Ethan's arm like water over stone, only to reconverge in his own fist. For a heartbeat, Boros shuddered as his arm trembled, the strike stalling against Ethan's palm. It was as though his power had stumbled into a hidden quagmire. The more he struggled to break free, the deeper he sank. Chapter 494, Getting Serious. A flicker of panic appeared in Boros's eyes. He felt as though an invisible mountain pressed down on him, stealing every ounce of his strength. When Ethan's palm closed around his fist, it was like iron pincers crushing bone. Searing pain shot through Boros's arm and spread through his entire body. What kind of power is this? Boros gasped, shock and fury warring in his voice. Ethan held his grip without effort, his expression cool. "If you insist on taking this seriously," he said quietly, "then I'll match you blow for blow." At that, Boros let out a guttural roar. The black veins crisscrossing his skin flared to life, crackling like lightning across a stormy sky. In an instant, his limbs seemed to swell with energy. Muscles bulged, then tightened until they formed a gleaming dark armor around his body. His entire form took on a deep blue-black hue, as if he'd been reborn from the void itself. Power radiated from Boros in waves so intense that the very air trembled. He planted his feet and flexed his arms, and the resulting gusts of wind whipped around him like an oncoming gale. "Now I'm ready," Boros growled, every syllable trembling with raw, destructive force. "Let's see what you've got, Ethan." The battlefield fell into a tense hush as the two fighters squared off, one locked in unshakable control, the other reborn into a fearsome new form. The next clash would decide everything. Boom! Boros's voice crackled with manic excitement as he vanished in an instant. When he reappeared, he was already looming before Ethan, his fists driving forward like a battering ram. Yet Ethan didn't flinch. A teasing smirk curved his lips as he raised his palm to meet Boros's blow. The two forces collided in midair with cataclysmic power, like a tidal wave slamming against solid rock, sending shockwaves rippling outward. Brilliant strands of light danced where Boros's destructive fury intertwined with Ethan's boundless vitality. Each strike shook the very atmosphere, yet Ethan held his ground and even seemed to gain momentum. Again and again, their figures locked and spun in the air, each impact threatening to obliterate everything around them. Still, the metal floor beneath Ethan remained unscathed. Boros knew the full extent of his might, but confronting Ethan's relentless counterpunches felt unnervingly alien. All the while, Ethan pressed his advantage, his life-infused energy pouring outward in an unbroken surge. With every collision, their clashing auras pulsed like twin stars on the verge of supernova, yet neither warrior yielded. The battle raged on, more fierce and dazzling with each heartbeat. The violent, concussive force didn't go to waste. But when Boros pressed his fist home, he felt as though he'd struck something unshakable, yet something that struck back just as hard. It was that same power that had once cost him dearly in a head-on collision, obliterating his entire arm. Here against Ethan, however, he'd met true resistance. Ethan hadn't simply absorbed the attack, he'd fought back, and it stung. Gathering his energy, Boros allowed his arm to knit itself back to its original form in a single breath. A confident grin spread across his face. "You know," he said, "on my home world, where only the strongest survive in the harshest conditions, our self-healing is unmatched in the universe." He flexed the restored limb, the golden light of regeneration fading from his skin. My natural healing rate, my bodily functions, and my reserve potential, they're all top tier among my people. Wounds that would kill you outright, I can mend in just seconds. Boros leaned forward, eyes gleaming with pride. Impressive, isn't it? You realize our clan, struggling to survive on this merciless world, is constantly besieged by an endless tide of monsters, just like the 3 you've already torn apart. And yet the fiercest among them only ever reaches dragon level. Dragon level? Boros' curiosity flared. From what he and Saitama had witnessed, the cosmic dark matter pirates clearly hadn't bothered scout Earth's fighters, so there was no evidence to refute Ethan's claim, nor any reason to suspect he was lying. Ethan nodded. We humans rank every danger, natural disasters, alien invasions, by threat level. The entry grade is wolf level, capable of killing, but generally controllable. Tiger level matches the basic strength of your foot soldiers. Ghost level? That's where your elite warriors reside, the kind who might even crack the top 3. He paused, letting that sink in. His words rang true. A showdown between Longshai and Guidian could swing either way. At the very least, they could send Mr. Bakazan to challenge the giant. Chapter Text: Ghosts, Dragons, and Gods. Ethan leaned forward, eyes bright with conviction. That giant you saw isn't just a hulking brute. He's classified as a ghost in every combat compendium. His movements are astonishingly fluid, and with a single series of punches, he can gouge out a crater the size of a house. He paused, letting the image settle in. And Bakuzan? He weathered an assault from a 3-legged titan without so much as a scratch. That alone earns him dragon rank. Poros's brow furrowed. Dragon rank? Ethan nodded soberly. Dragon rank is the apex tier for fighters, and the most fearsome monsters on Earth. Only 3 beings have ever surpassed it. Esdeath, who's been trailing me, has already slain 2 S-class warriors to maintain that status. Above dragon rank lies a single, terrifying level, the god rank. Warriors at that tier have the power to annihilate all mankind. Poros stared at Ethan, disbelief giving way to awe. He'd known Ethan to be straightforward, never one for exaggeration, and yet the notion that Earth harbored so many dragon-level threats was staggering. A deep voice cut through the stunned silence. God rank, you say? Then I suppose that leaves only one candidate. Me. Boros stepped from the shadows, his presence exuding raw strength. He'd climbed to dragon status by conquering over 1,000 worlds and collecting their fiercest champions. Now, to find so many elite fighters on a single planet sparked a greedy excitement in him. If he ever needed fresh recruits, Earth might just supply them. He fixed Ethan with a steely glare. You're not god rank yet. Only those who can defeat me can claim that title. A tense hush fell over the clearing as Ethan and Poros exchanged glances. The bar had just been raised, and it threatened to reshape the fate of every warrior on the planet. Ethan's eyes burned with determination as the alien warlord readied his next assault. We Earthlings may not regenerate like you do, he called out, voice echoing across the chamber, but we fight with indestructible bodies and unmatched strength. Boros paused, his face splitting into a wide grin. I see, he rumbled, excitement crackling in his tone. It seems we are each the greatest warrior of our own race. Did this match the prophecy's description? A champion forged in the harshest conditions, strong enough to stand toe-to-toe with Boros himself. By all means continue, he urged. In an instant, Boros unleashed a colossal gas explosion, an ear-splitting succession of booms that shook the very hull of the spaceship. Inside, Esdeath stood unharmed, shielded by Ethan's shimmering biological force field. No matter how powerful Boros's attack, or how desperately he pushed beyond exhaustion, he could not breach that barrier. Stripped of his armor yet still capable of supersonic flight, Boros hurled himself through the blast radius, but the force field held fast. Bang! The final detonation rattled the deck plates, yet the ship endured. And then, as before, Boros was sent sprawling, knocked unconscious by his own unchecked fury. Chapter 495. Boros is shocked. Ethan's eyes gleamed with determination as his fighting spirit flared hotter than molten oil. Hey, Boros, I've made up my mind. Boros paused mid-stride. Made up his mind about what? If you lose, Ethan continued, voice steady, you'll become my subordinate, my absolute servant. Boros cocked an eyebrow, a slow smile curling on his lips. Is that so? You really think you can make me capitulate? Ethan met his gaze without flinching. I do, and more than that, I plan to keep you by my side, so we can conquer the universe together. For a moment, Boros simply stared. Then he threw back his head and laughed, a roar that shook the very air between them. Excellent. If I lose, I'll serve you, he agreed, clapping his hands. Because I've been waiting for a challenge worthy of my strength. To conquer the universe and rule as its true overlord, I need powerful allies, willing warriors who match my might. You, Earthling, may be the strongest on your planet, but with me at your side, we'll be unstoppable. He glanced up at the swirling nebula overhead. Besides, my race's biology grants us near immortality. 1 day on my world spans 10 Earth days, and as long as I refrain from expending my meteor burst power recklessly, I can live for thousands of your years. You, Ethan, are Earth's finest warrior. Who knows how long your own life will last? But even if you fall in battle, Earth will endure, and so will our grand ambitions. Ethan nodded once, resolute. The stakes were set. If the two of them unleashed their full power on each other, the universe itself might tremble, and when the dust settled, one would stand triumphant, and the other would swear fealty forever. Ethan's very existence in such a merciless environment seemed inconceivable. If one like him could be born here, then a second was surely impossible. But there was no time for doubt. Boros remained firmly on the offensive. In his unleashed state, he didn't need any flashy techniques. Pure speed was his deadliest weapon. A single straight-line dash from him carried hundreds of times more force than the fiercest fighter jet. The friction with the atmosphere sent temperatures soaring high enough to melt the spacecraft's alloy, and yet his biological force field held it all together without a scratch. Boom, boom, boom. The two warriors clashed again and again in rapid succession, each collision thundering like a world-ending explosion and striking with lightning speed. Any hesitation would mean instant death. Then Ethan shifted his stance. Brilliant light surged through his limbs before channeling into his right fist. To any observing eye, it was clear. The punch he was about to unleash could shatter continents. Boros, however, met Ethan's gathering energy head-on, his expression unflinching as he prepared to absorb that devastating blow. Ethan's lips curved into a cold smile as he clenched his fists and braced for Boros's attack. When their blows met, the impact reverberated like thunder, air itself seeming to freeze around the clashing fists. In a blur of motion, the two fighters exchanged strike after strike so swiftly that onlookers could barely discern their forms. But Ethan held the advantage. With a final, bone-shuddering punch, he drove Boros backward. The larger man's body crumpled against the ground, sending up a thick plume of dust. No, Boros rasped, eyes blazing with shock and fury. He hadn't expected to be outmatched so decisively. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself to his feet, charging his fists with every ounce of power he had left. Before Boros could unleash his next blow, Ethan was already upon him, faster, sharper, and merciless. Every strike Ethan delivered targeted Boros's openings with surgical precision, preventing any counterattack. Blow after blow landed without hesitation, each one driving Boros further off balance. Staggering back, Boros's heavy breaths echoed through the silent battlefield. A wild grin spread across his bruised face. Ha ha! This is the sort of fight I've been craving. Next time I'll go all out. But I won't. Die. He roared, and the very air around him trembled as raw energy began to swirl at his back, readying him for another desperate assault. Boros's entire form shivered beneath a shimmering aura, an energy accumulation field crackling around him like a living storm. Bolts of blue lightning danced across his armor, converging on the single, glowing eye set in the center of his chest. That eye flared with brilliant cerulean light as he drew in a final surge of power. Now, Boros boomed, voice echoing like thunder, I will unleash every iota of energy in my body. Whoever dares touch it will be reduced to ash. In an instant, he detonated the gathered force. A blinding beam, sharp enough to pierce heaven and earth, tore through the chamber. Walls and floor quaked under its searing brilliance. Even the air itself seemed scorched by its passage. Ethan grinned, unmoved. A pathetic fish cannon, he scoffed, spirit flaring. Warm, golden energy swirled around his palms, power drawn from the Dragon Balls, his own true strength. I'll return the favor. No so-called dragon-level monster can stand against my technique. With that, Ethan thrust his hand forward, channeling his aura into a concentrated sphere of shimmering gold. Boros's expression hardened. He felt it then, the raw, terrifying pulse of Ethan's power, like the very breath of the cosmos rushing toward him. Both warriors braced themselves as their rival energies surged to a climax. The next instant would decide everything. Thunder boomed across the blasted battlefield as Ethan's Qigong wave met Boros's fish cannon beam in midair. The collision ripped open the sky like 1,000 simultaneous thunderclaps, shattering Boros's once impenetrable biological force field. The full force of Ethan's attack struck Boros directly, and his massive form fragmented into dozens of gleaming shards. Esdeath stood at the edge of the wreckage, arms folded, unmoved. She had faith in her master's defenses. If those defenses fell, it meant only that he'd underestimated his opponent. "No," Ethan said quietly, stepping forward through swirling dust. A fierce blue glow erupted from the scattered fragments of Boros's body. Drawing on the ship's virtually limitless energy, enough to sustain interstellar travel for 20 years, the pieces hummed and reformed, knitting themselves back into a whole, towering figure. Boros shook himself free of debris, rose to one knee, and glared at Ethan with renewed ferocity. "Give up, Boros," Ethan commanded, ki coalescing around his outstretched hand. Boros's grin spread savage and wide, his eyes alight with defiance. "Give up," he roared. "Hardly. This fight is just getting started." He lunged forward, energy crackling around him as the battle resumed. The battlefield lay in ruins, shattered rock and swirling dust danced around the two combatants. Boros studied his opponent with growing respect. "You're strong, Ethan, truly formidable," Boros admitted, voice booming across the cratered plain. "But I've reached my limit of restraint. Now surrender." Ethan stood unmoved, energy crackling around him like a living storm. He met Boros's gaze evenly. "You're strong too," he replied calmly. "But I promise not to hold back. If you won't yield, then I will." Boros paused, considering his options. He could unleash a sudden meteor strike and end this fight in an instant, though Ethan might die under the blast, and that would be a hollow victory. Or he could rain down wave after wave of energy attacks, slowly draining Ethan's strength until he collapsed. A slower, more certain triumph, yet one he worried would feel unfair. His eyes gleamed in the dim light. "So you have a hidden power. Impressive, but I'm no stranger to merciless victory. Refuse me, and I will kill you." Ethan's expression hardened. "My hidden power isn't just any trick," he said. "I am the Super Earthling, the legendary warrior reborn only once every 1,000 years. Everything about me, strength, speed, durability, is amplified 50-fold. Shock rippled across Boros's face. "A Super Earthling," he whispered, as the dust settled, and both warriors braced for the storm about to break. Chapter 496, Super Earthlings. Super Earthling? Boros staggered back, confusion lining his voice. He'd never heard the term. In his experience, only the mightiest fighters, those who wielded unbelievable, mysterious powers, were dubbed super warriors. But Super Earthling? It sounded absurd. Ethan met his stare coolly. "A true Super Earthling," he said, "can multiply every facet of their abilities, strength, speed, endurance, all by 50. 50 times? The number echoed in Boros's mind like a cruel joke. "That can't be real," he muttered. Ethan shrugged, his expression unreadable. "See for yourself." Watching from the sidelines, Esdeath narrowed her eyes. Boros was already a living legend, arguably one of the strongest beings in the universe, yet he'd never encountered this Super Earthling concept. If Ethan's claim was true, it was the kind of revelation that could shift entire power balances. Still, Ethan looked entirely at ease. Could he really back up such an outrageous assertion? Boros let out a feral laugh. "All right then, if you're so confident, I'll show you what I can do at my very best." His eyes flared with excitement as he summoned his signature technique, Meteoric Burst. The world seemed to tremble as his skin flushed a deep, cherry-red hue. Muscles expanded, veins pulsed with crimson energy, and his entire form grew more imposing in an instant. This was Boros's ultimate trump card, a shockwave of raw power designed to smash through limits and overwhelm any opponent. But such strength came at a price. Every second in this transcendent state strained his body, threatening to consume his life force and shave years off his lifespan. Yet Boros cared little for the cost. All that mattered now was the fight, and the chance to test the truth of Ethan's Super Earthling claim. The battlefield crackled with anticipation. Boros, now blazing with red-hot power, lunged forward, ready to unleash a storm the likes of which the universe had never seen. Meanwhile, Ethan stood his ground, eyes cold and unwavering, as the two titans prepared to collide. Ethan's golden hair had grown so long it swept past his shoulders, cascading down his back like a living waterfall. His eyes had gone completely white, save for tiny black pupils, and a brilliant white aura crackled around him. The dark blue stripes that once marked his skin had returned to their original shade, now gleaming against the purity of his glow. When he moved, it was as if the very air trembled. His power had reached a level few could comprehend. But across the battlefield, Boros was no less fearsome. The moment the meteor above them exploded, his speed accelerated to inhuman levels. In the blink of an eye, he streaked through the sky like a violet arrow, the atmosphere around him melting and warping in his wake. He no longer relied on arms or legs alone. Every ounce of his energy had become fuel, propelling him with a force that made biological limits irrelevant. With a single strike, he could tear a battleship in half or fling an enemy all the way to the moon. In that instant, Boros was nothing less than a living storm, hair whipping wildly as though struck by lightning, moving faster than the mind could follow, a devastating meteor incarnate. Ethan's eyes flashed pure white, the black of his pupils receding into bottomless voids that seemed to swallow everything around them. A brilliant white aura rippled over his body, endlessly pulsing outward like a living force. Beneath that energy, his muscles bulged and tightened, every sinew reinforced with raw power. The dark blue stripes along his arms and torso ignited into a vivid azure glow, gleaming like distant stars awakened by his presence. His speed shattered all limits. Each movement was a streak of light, a comet racing across the sky in an instant. His strength, too, had soared beyond measure. Every punch and kick unleashed shockwaves that obliterated nearby starships and reduced buildings to dust. One blow was enough to cleave a mountain in half. More incredible still, he could vanish from one spot and reappear thousands of meters away in the blink of an eye, then return just as quickly, so fast that no human eye could track him. In that transcendent moment, Ethan was more than a warrior. He had become a living cataclysm, the true god of destruction. Ethan's every attack carried the weight of annihilation, as if he meant to bend the entire cosmos to his will. Boros, his alien challenger, stepped forward with a predatory gleam in his one remaining eye. "Ethan, where is your transformation?" he demanded. "Show me your true power, Super Earthling, or die trying." A savage smile crept across Boros's face. "This is exactly what I've been waiting for." No sooner had he spoken than a tremendous force rippled through the battlefield. Golden light exploded outward from Ethan's form, bathing the area in brilliance. It was as though he had become a living sun, every molecule of his body humming with energy drawn from the farthest reaches of space. In an instant, his silhouette sharpened, his muscles bristled with newfound might, and his eyes blazed like twin stars. A thunderous roar erupted from deep within Ethan's chest as he lifted his arms and let the incandescent energy pour freely around him. The radiant aura pulsed with ceaseless intensity, dwarfing even Boros's fearsome power. Waves of golden light rippled across the arena, and the ground trembled beneath their clash of wills. "Behold, the Super Earthling!" Ethan shouted, the exhilaration evident in his voice. He laughed, a sound of pure triumph that echoed like a war horn. "Is that the reaction you wanted? Ha! Now you'll see what Earthlings are truly capable of." At the challenge, Boros threw back his head and bellowed, his own combat spirit igniting into a wildfire of ferocity. For a moment, the two warriors faced off in silence, their auras crackling and colliding. Then, with a shared burst of primal energy, they leapt into the unknown, each determined to prove himself the ultimate champion. Boros's body flickered into a flash of pink and white light, and in an instant he was gone. The deck beneath him collapsed into a yawning chasm. Yet even before his punch could arrive, Ethan had already felt the tidal wave of force roaring toward him, so immense it rattled the ship's hull, warped the air into an armor harder than steel. With perfect stillness, Ethan lifted a single hand and caught Boros's fist. The impact rang through the chamber like a hammer on anvil. Boros's pupils shrank in shock. Never before had any creature halted his strike. "What's the matter, Boros? Hesitating?" Ethan's voice was calm, almost amused. Boros's lips twisted into a ruthless grin. Not in the slightest. In the next heartbeat, white and golden light exploded around him, fracturing into dozens of shimmering after-images that filled the room. Then came the real assault. Fists and kicks crashed like thunder, boom, bang, boom, their speed so blinding that even Esdeath, watching from the edge, could barely track their movements. The duel had reached a ferocity beyond anything the ship's crew had ever witnessed. Boros relied on his race's innate energy sensitivity to see Ethan's movements without using his eyes. He was genuinely surprised that Ethan could match his pace. Then, boom! A blast of golden and white energy collided between them, sending tremors rippling through the supposedly indestructible space. The two conflicting forces pressed and crackled against each other, neither willing to yield. For a heartbeat, the air itself seemed to crack. Then with a deafening roar, the energies overloaded. The resulting explosion hurled both fighters backward. When the smoke cleared, Boros's enhanced sight, a blend of residual vision and pure energy sense, registered Ethan's form vanishing in an instant. His pupils narrowed. Ethan had just accelerated again, pushing his speed to new heights. Before Boros could fully recover, he reacted on pure instinct, raising his arm to block an incoming strike. A punch charged with raw, explosive energy slammed into his forearm so forcefully that he staggered from the impact. Boros gritted his teeth. This opponent was no ordinary foe, and the battle was only just beginning. Chapter 497, The Sublight Speed Clash. That shattered a world. Boros staggered, his entire body quaking with each aftershock of the previous impact. The vast explosion and its concussive force would have killed any normal being outright, but Boros endured only because he'd reduced himself to a half-energy life state. Even so, he'd never felt a blow so devastating. Summoning every shred of remaining power, Boros lashed out in a desperate counterattack, only to swing at empty air. Ethan had already vanished from view, moving so quickly that Boros could hardly believe the flurry of thousands of punches he'd just taken hadn't happened a moment ago. He spun left, then right, searching, even glancing up in frantic hope. And there he was, Ethan's right leg arcing toward him, wrapped in crackling, domineering force. Boros tried to bring his arms up to block, interposing bone and steel against the onrushing energy. But Ethan's battle axe, an instrument of pure, unstoppable momentum, came crashing down. In a single, brutal strike, it sheared Boros's arms from their sockets. The shockwave coursed through the rest of his body, hurling him face first into the scorched earth. A crater bloomed beneath him, glassed and fractured. Every instinct screamed retreat, but there was nothing left to shield him. In raw strength and impossible speed, Boros had met his match and lost. There was simply no advantage he could claim against an opponent who fought at sublight velocity. Boros knew exactly what he had to do. While Earthlings, and even the so-called super-Earthlings, enjoyed remarkably well-rounded powers, his one true edge was speed. As long as he maintained enough distance to build up a run, he could outpace any opponent. He lived for the challenge, the rush of clashing forces, the electric tension of a fight that demanded every ounce of his strength and cunning. With a roar, Boros vanished beneath the ground, slipping past Ethan's hail of energy blasts. Before Ethan could adjust, Boros resurfaced inside the hull of his spacecraft, and then, in a heartbeat, the two of them burst back out, tearing through the vessel's plating. Boros drew in a deep breath, then disappeared again the instant Ethan lunged to strike him. He reappeared on the far side of the ship, racing circles around Ethan before launching himself at full tilt. Ethan met him head-on, their bodies colliding in a cataclysm of force. Each blow sent shockwaves rippling through the ship's outer shell. The once invulnerable plating, forged to endure the void of space, yielded like butter under their onslaught, melting into rivers of glowing magma. Boros slowed mid-attack, wide-eyed with surprise. Ethan was still standing, still countering every strike. Together, their blows reduced the starship to a shattered husk, its twisted metal frame collapsing into a molten wreck. As the last vestiges of the vessel crumbled around them, Boros realized he'd met his match, and the fight was far from over. Every time Boros and Ethan struck each other, the resulting storm of destruction dwarfed even the most catastrophic natural disasters in history. Mountains were shattered, The earth itself trembled beneath the force of their blows. From a distance, the gathered S-Class heroes watched in stunned silence. Only Flash, with his superhuman reflexes, could track the action at all, and even he perceived only two streaks of light flashing past one another. At these speeds, far beyond anything human, each impact drove the two combatants through the atmosphere like meteors, leaving scorched trails in their wake. Where their energies collided, the surrounding air swelled to temperatures of millions of degrees in an instant, producing a visible, rippling shock wave that rolled outward like a titanic ocean wave. It swept across the battlefield with annihilating force, vaporizing everything in its path. Whether Boros and Ethan raced in straight lines or curved arcs, every maneuver unleashed or absorbed unimaginable power, thrust and counter-thrust, melding into a cataclysmic dance that threatened to level the entire city around them. Ethan and his opponent stood at the heart of the battlefield, their opposing forces colliding in a relentless clash. Wherever their energies met, raw magnetic and electric fields intertwined, each surge amplifying the other until the very air around them trembled. The resulting fluctuations were so intense that electronics for hundreds of kilometers in every direction short-circuited and died in an instant, along with anyone too close to the epicenter. Every blow they struck, whether a brutal physical strike or a concentrated burst of energy, unleashed staggering kinetic and potential forces. Those forces compressed, heated, and ionized the surrounding air molecules so violently that a plasma of unimaginable density, pressure, and temperature erupted in their wake. From these roiling plasmas, brilliant beams shot forth, illuminating the once starless sky with blinding light. Brighter even than the noonday sun, these plasma streams burned at millions of degrees, far hotter than the sun's surface. As they fanned out, their searing cores continued to collide with fresh air, triggering cascades of X-rays and gamma rays that rained down on the battlefield below. In that moment, the very heavens seemed to roar with energy, and no living creature could withstand its fury. In the blink of an eye, searing beams of energy swept across the battlefield, bathing everything in lethal radiation. Every living creature caught in their path was grievously injured as the rays tore through flesh, armor, and earth alike. Moving at sublight speeds, these beams generated intense relativistic distortions that bent the very fabric of space and time, what scientists call a relativistic shock wave. When that shock wave formed, it violently compressed and then released the surrounding matter and energy, unleashing titanic tides of force. Mountain ranges split in two. Ocean waters surged into walls of water hundreds of meters high. The devastation didn't stop at the surface. Deep within the planet, the crust and mantle were shaken and squeezed so brutally that massive earthquakes ripped across continents and volcanoes erupted in furious plumes. Oceans boiled away in great clouds of steam that soon blotted out the sky, plunging the world into an apocalyptic haze. Under the raw power of their clash, the night sky itself seemed to blacken, and even the sun's brilliance faded to a feeble glow. Pollutants and radiation spiked in the atmosphere, giving rise to fierce storms, roaring tornadoes, and hail the size of fists. Ecosystems collapsed under the onslaught, entire forests wilted, untold numbers of animals perished, and the food chain fractured beyond repair. Every creature on Earth stood on the brink of extinction. Beneath the surface, the planet shuddered, its rotation stuttered, its orbit wobbled, and Earth's very position in the cosmos shifted ever so slightly. The devastation was total, and yet shockingly brief. Boros dropped to one knee, chest heaving, sweat stinging his eyes. Across from him, Ethan stood perfectly still, his expression calm as though nothing more than a summer breeze had passed between them. Ethan tilted his head and asked quietly, "You okay? Didn't expect it to hit that hard, did you?" Despite the cataclysm around them, their battle had raged for less than a single second. For two monsters constrained to sublight speeds, even a single second could stretch into an agonizing eternity. Chapter 498, Rebuilding the Earth's Ecosystem and Environment. Boros staggered, panting fiercely. He hated how fleeting this transformation was. Every second in this state drained his life force. Across from him, Ethan stood calm, reading the fatigue in Boros's eyes. "So," Boros gasped, "you've seen enough. We'll call off the fight?" Ethan offered a confident smile, He knew exactly how far Boros was willing to go and no further. "Not yet," he said quietly. "I have one final technique. If this can't stop you—" Boros narrowed his eyes and drew in a shuddering breath. "Oh, then I'm eager to see what you've got." Ethan's expression hardened. "Be warned, this move draws every last drop of my energy. If it doesn't defeat you outright, it will annihilate the entire surface of this planet." No sooner had he finished speaking than Boros's chest began to glow with golden light. The energy humming around him intensified until he seemed to become a living star. "Fine," Boros muttered, raising his arms. "Let's end this." With a bellow that shook the heavens, Boros unleashed his ultimate technique, the Star Collapse Roaring Cannon. A blinding beam of golden light tore through the sky, so brilliant it cast everything around it into shadow. The air itself was ripped away, leaving a yawning void centered on Boros's charging form. Ethan braced himself, knowing the next moments would decide not only his fate, but the fate of the world itself. The gash in the earth kept widening, its ragged edges twisting reality itself, as if the very air were being torn apart. A brilliant beam of light shot upward, and with it came powerful shock waves that rippled outward in all directions. These waves carried such ferocious energy that the surrounding air ignited in heat, forming roaring thermal currents that clashed and thundered in a deafening crescendo. In the distance, mountains buckled under the onslaught. Massive boulders tore free and hurtled down their slopes, turning the mountainside into a cascading river of stone. Anything caught in that avalanche, buildings, trees, even the earth beneath them, was pulverized without mercy. Structures that had stood for centuries collapsed into ruin. Ancient oaks were uprooted, torn through the sky, and reduced to ash before they even hit the ground. The ocean, too, trembled under the force. Towering waves exploded into a cloud of steam, transforming the sea into a swirling fog that swallowed the horizon. The mist crept inland, smothering the landscape in a shroud so thick it felt like stepping into another dimension, where forms blurred and sounds were muted by the vaporous veil. Standing at the edge of this cataclysm, Ethan felt the raw power of the phenomenon pulse through him. Yet there was no fear in his heart, only a fierce thrill of anticipation, as if the shattering world around him were unveiling some grand, terrible revelation. Ethan pressed his palms together, and golden light flared across his body, growing so intense that the very air began to tremble. Wrapped in that radiant energy, he seemed to merge with it entirely. At the height of his power, he thrust his arms forward, unleashing a shockwave of gold equal in force to Boros's own assault, its booming roar tearing through the battlefield toward the rival beam of light. Big bang! The instant the two attacks met, time itself seemed to pause. Boros's and Ethan's energies collided like two simmering stars, igniting an unprecedented cataclysm. The sheer magnitude of their power dwarfed anything a mortal mind could imagine. High above, the convergence churned into a massive vortex, ravenously sucking in every molecule of air and heating them to scorching temperatures. As those molecules ionized into searing plasma, they unleashed a blinding brilliance that set the sky ablaze, a second sun heralding the epic clash below. Ethan stared in horrified fascination as the swirling energy vortex on the horizon grew, its rotating walls of light and shadow stretching wider by the second. The sky, once tranquil, began to quake under its silent roar. In an instant, the vortex's power crushed the air's delicate balance. Torrents of superheated high-pressure winds sprang outward, driving air molecules to violent, chaotic collisions. Waves of blistering heat and thunderous shock rippled through the atmosphere, tearing apart the once stable layers of sky. Then came the cataclysmic eruption. A deafening crack split the heavens as the vortex unleashed its pent-up energy in one colossal blast, an explosion so fierce it felt capable of shattering the planet itself. Bright fireball and searing winds raced across the land, transforming the world into a tempest of flame and fury. Trees erupted into embers, rivers boiled in moments, and the very ground buckled beneath tongues of flame. The biosphere reeled, every living creature rocked by the blast's unrelenting force. At a microscopic level, the explosion's energy redefined life's smallest building blocks. Molecules that had once danced in ordered harmony were flung into disarray, their normal motions upended by shock waves of unimaginable intensity. The surface of the earth shuddered and split, sending plumes of dust and debris skyward to mingle with the ravaged atmosphere. Through it all, Ethan remained rooted to the spot, his heart pounding as he bore witness to forces that had shattered every boundary nature once held inviolable. In the aftermath of that world-shaking blast, nothing would ever be the same again. In this region, the air's temperature, density, and pressure shot through the roof, as if the sky itself had become a roaring furnace. Blasts of raw energy spread outward, driving oxygen and nitrogen molecules to rupture their familiar bonds and recombine into all manner of exotic, unstable compounds. Those new gases dispersed almost instantly, colliding with their neighbors and setting off a chain reaction of combustion and transformation. With every chemical event, fresh heat and pressure were released, tearing the atmosphere further from equilibrium and hurling it into utter chaos. Below, the same wave of energy laid waste to the ground. The moment it struck, rocks, soil, and water soaked up tremendous heat and expanded violently. Crags buckled, pebbles cracked, and once smooth plains were forced into jarring ridges and fissures. As the energy pulse radiated outward, it drove minerals deep in the bedrock through sudden phase changes, turning solids to molten slurries and back again, leaving the Earth's surface a fractured, unrecognizable wasteland. Under the relentless heat, even the toughest minerals, quartz, feldspar, and others, melt into molten silicates. Rivers of glowing magma surge across the land, creating an endless sea of fire. These incandescent flows swallow forests and grasslands alike, turning lush greenery into smoldering ash in an instant. Every living creature on the surface suffers the same fate. Sap and bodily fluids vaporize almost immediately, leaving behind charred, husk-like shells. Deeper underground, organisms fare no better. The rocks and soil compact under extreme temperature and pressure, crushing anything caught within to a lifeless oblivion. On a microscopic level, the catastrophe is equally dramatic. Air molecules, energized by the overwhelming heat, race wildly through space, colliding with one another in a chaotic dance. This frenzy of molecular motion ripples outward, driving temperature and pressure to unimaginable extremes throughout the ravaged environment. The intense surge of energy allows the electrons in each atom to absorb enough power to leap up to a higher energy level. Chapter 499. When two supreme beings clashed, all fell to ruin. The moment Ethan and his adversary unleashed their ultimate powers, the very fabric of the planet began to unravel. At the atomic level, electrons leap between energy states, altering how each atom bonded and behaved. Under the crushing heat and crushing pressure of their collision, once stable molecules tore themselves apart, only to recombine into strange new compounds. These alien substances spilled across the air, seeped into the soil, and infiltrated the biosphere, transforming the world's chemistry in an instant. But the havoc didn't stop at the microscopic scale. The sheer force of their energies warped the surrounding space, twisting light rays that had once traveled in straight lines. Everywhere, visual distortions warped reality itself, turning familiar landscapes into a surreal blur. Even the planet's solid structures became brittle under the relentless onslaught. Buildings cracked open, mountains crumbled, and the ground itself fractured, its internal scaffolding shattered beyond repair. In the wake of their colossal clash, the two opposing energies had effectively sterilized the planet's surface. Atmosphere, geology, and life, everything suffered irreparable damage. What remained was a scarred, hollow shell, a testament to the destructive potential of powers that no world was ever meant to contain. They hadn't just ripped apart the planet's surface and atmosphere, they'd unleashed a catastrophe on the entire biosphere. From the tiniest molecules to the largest land masses, this force twisted atomic bonds and shredded the internal structures of every material it touched. Whole ecosystems collapsed overnight, their intricate balances erased. It would take centuries, perhaps millennia, before life could even begin to reclaim these shattered lands. And for the few survivors, the real trial was only beginning. In a world stripped bare, only the swiftest, toughest, most adaptable beings would stand a chance at rebuilding a stable ecosystem. This calamity tested not only nature's resilience, but the very will to live. Only those organisms capable of constant adaptation and evolution could endure and eventually thrive under these unforgiving skies. Boros and Ethan each strained to contain the surging hedging energy. Around them, the air grew so thin that every breath felt like inhaling razor-sharp shards. Ethan's grip tightened on his staff, knuckles white. "What the hell just happened?" he gasped. When the storm of power finally subsided, there were no heroes left standing, only the most monstrous survivors, creatures born of the cataclysm itself, prowled the ruins of a world reborn in devastation. Hell Tornado hovered over the shattered city, her form wreathed in crackling green telekinetic energy. She stared down at the ruin below, disbelief and rage warping her features. "Did you two monsters do this?" she roared. Above her, two figures clashed in midair, trading blows as clouds of dust and debris swirled around them. Hell Tornado's fury flared, and she lunged toward them, only to be stopped by a firm hand. A tall woman in a pristine white military uniform stood before her, every inch the picture of cold regality. Esdeath's cool blue eyes met Hell Tornado's glare without a flicker of hesitation. "I can't allow you to interfere with their duel," Esdeath said, lifting the brim of her cap in a casual salute. "After witnessing a display of power like that, I'd think you'd know better than to get involved." Hell Tornado bristled, but even she had to admit that what she'd just seen was beyond anything she'd ever encountered, so devastating that her sister would have had no chance at all. That thought set her blood boiling all over again. "Step aside," Hell Tornado growled. "I didn't come here to let you defend the murderer who destroyed my sister's life." Esdeath's lips curved into a predator's smile. "Unable to reason things out? How delightful. I'm not exactly the negotiating type either." She let go of Hell Tornado's arm, the green aura around the Younger woman crackled and pulsed as both warriors readied themselves for the confrontation to come. The war between their armies was on the brink of erupting, but at this moment, the duel between Boros and Ethan had already reached its end. Ethan's Big Bang attack tore through Boros's star-collapsing roar cannon, and for a heartbeat it seemed poised to swallow the alien warrior whole. Then, as suddenly as it appeared, the energy vanished. Boros stared in stunned silence, one arm charred and useless, the other trembling at his side. Across the blasted field, Ethan stood perfectly unscathed, his clothes clean, his posture calm. In that instant, every doubt fell away. Ethan's power dwarfed his own. Ethan folded his arms, his voice quiet but unyielding. "Boros, you're a great fighter, not someone bent on self-destruction. Surrender now. I have no wish to kill you." Boros shook his head, pain and pride warring in his eyes. "I can't," he whispered. "I made a promise, to my crew, to my people. Even if I die here, I'll keep it." A flicker of regret passed over his face. He wanted to see more of the universe, to test himself against stronger foes, yet he couldn't bring himself to bow. Ethan, by contrast, harbored no such burden. He respected strength above all and had no qualms about yielding to a superior force. Boros's voice cracked as he took a shuddering breath. "But what choice do I have now? The Earth is already in ruins, and my ship is gone. I have nowhere left to run." He fixed Ethan with a steady gaze. Though every limb throbbed with pain, his spirit still burned, and with it the fate of their conflict and the war that threatened to engulf them both. "If we want to restore it, we'll have to wait hundreds of Earth years, maybe even longer," Boros said coolly. He'd seen the devastation the star-collapsing roar cannon could wreak before. This was hardly the first world he'd reduced to ruins. "Restore it?" Ethan asked, a small, confident smile tugging at his lips. Hell Tornado and Esdeath stared at him in stunned silence. Even Hell Tornado hesitated, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. But Ethan felt something stirring beneath his skin, time itself, flowing around him like a melody on stretched strings. Every heartbeat was a note, every breath part of the world's grand symphony. Then a surge of energy burst from Ethan, ripping apart the bonds of space and time. It was as if the entire world had paused, the air turning soft and pliant in his presence. His spiritual power roared like a torrent, bending the currents of time to his will. In that instant, he became both conductor and orchestra, guiding the temporal symphony with a single gesture. Moments leaped and spun backward under his command. First, the blasted landscape began to heal. Scorched earth smoothed itself out, cracks knitting closed, grass sprouting where none should have been. The world was rewinding. Every shattered peak, every ruined valley, every charred tree inching back toward its former glory. and at the heart of it all stood Ethan, master of time's flow, watching his will reshape reality itself. Ethan stood on the edge of the ravaged valley, watching in awe as life breathed back into the world. Around him, withered trees sprouted tender green leaves, and parched grass rolled back into soft, vibrant carpets. The rivers, once dry and cracked, swelled with crystal-clear water, winding through the land to nurture every root and stone. From dark burrows and hidden nests, creatures of all shapes and sizes crept out into the open, reclaiming the earth with chirps, rustles, and calls that rang like a new dawn. Above, the sky itself seemed to mend. Invisible fragments, shattered by the cataclysmic energy shock, began to reconnect. Oxygen and nitrogen atoms reunited, forging a clean, breathable air. Wisps of cloud gathered on the horizon, and soon gentle rain fell, washing dust from leaves and cooling the warmed soil. The scent of renewal, an intoxicating blend of wet earth and fresh foliage, filled the breeze, carrying with it a promise of tomorrow. Even the land's contours shifted back toward their former glory. Mountains that had been blasted flat now reared their peaks once more, dark against the sky. Rivers found their old channels, carving paths through valleys as if guided by an unseen hand. Volcanoes calmed their fiery throats, and the trembling earth stilled into peaceful quiet. Underneath it all, at the microscopic level, nature was conducting an equally miraculous transformation. Electrons, excited into chaos by the energy surge, drifted gently back into their lower energy orbits. Atoms, free and unsettled moments ago, reassociated into stable molecules. New compounds formed, then quietly broke down into simpler elements, returning matter to its most fundamental state, a subtle rebirth invisible to the naked eye. Ethan closed his eyes and took a deep breath, letting the pure air fill his lungs. In that moment, every scale of existence, from the soaring eagles above to the dancing electrons below, seemed to harmonize in a single, triumphant chord of restoration. The world was alive again, and so too was hope. Everything seemed to be coming back into balance, as if the world itself were composing a silent symphony of renewal. Chapter 500. Savior Ethan's spiritual power shone like a radiant beam, guiding the world's recovery. With every breath and every heartbeat, he harmonized with the flow of time. His consciousness reached into each passing moment, steering every change toward renewal. For a heartbeat, it was as if time itself paused. All life held its breath, awaiting rebirth. Each of Ethan's exhalations became a beacon of hope. His spiritual energy poured into the river of time, nudging its currents toward a brighter future. Then, in a single, awe-striking instant, everything transformed. The air brimmed with the essence of life. Earth's hues deepened and brightened. Creatures lost to the calamity stirred back to being, and the world pulsed with vitality once more. It was as though the disaster had never occurred, save for the scars etched into the hearts of its survivors. Ethan hadn't merely saved the world. He had woven a veil of forgetfulness, erasing any trace of his intervention. Though the people he rescued would never know his name, history would remember him as their savior. Yet, if he wished to remain hidden, why did he wander the moonlit streets in ornate brocade? Perhaps even a true hero enjoys the hush of reverent awe. Esdeath, Boros, and Hell Tornado stood frozen in disbelief. The way Ethan had bent time itself was utterly beyond anything they'd ever imagined. Shattered buildings and scorched earth bore witness to the raw devastation of his attack and to its terrifying precision. Hell Tornado narrowed his eyes and took a cautious step forward. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan leaned against a broken pillar, as if he'd just strolled in off the street. "Savior." Hell Tornado's jaw dropped. Savior? The sheer audacity of the claim would have been laughable under any other circumstances, but not now. They'd just faced an alien force more powerful than anyone had dared predict, and if Ethan hadn't intervened, Earth would already be lost. "You've left this place in ruins," Hell Tornado snarled, sweeping a hand toward the smoking skyline. "And you still have the nerve to call yourself the savior?" Hell Tornado's tone was all bravado, nothing like the frightened child he'd once been. Surviving that cataclysmic explosion had taught him one brutal lesson: never depend on anyone else. He'd molded himself into a one-man fortress, scarring over his need for help with raw power and a sharper tongue. In short, he was pure tsundere, tough on the outside, secretly desperate not to stand alone. Ethan simply watched him, unperturbed. The real battle, it seemed, was only just beginning. Ethan surveyed the battlefield with cool detachment. Hellspout's words still echoed in his ears. He's unyielding, unforgiving, yet he never lets a single hero fall in battle. My dear Tornado, he's far too soft. It's a shame Ethan has no taste for children, even if they're technically of age. He prefers ripe, fully grown fruit. And you, Storm of Hell, you're hopeless. Hellspout's sneer cut through the air as he prepared to strike at Boros. The alien warlord blinked in surprise. Ethan's power was undeniable, but this diminutive earth sorceress had the audacity to challenge him? What kind of statusless nobody did she think she was? And you, Hellspout continued, voice dripping contempt, must be the true leader of this invasion. Why are you still standing? With a disdainful grin, he beckoned to Boros. Come, I'll introduce you to a real monster. Ethan didn't even bother to refute him. Trying to reason with Hellspout was pointless, and he certainly wasn't about to do Saitama's thankless job for him. No, his plan was simpler. Lure Boros into contact with Saitama and let the Saiyan realize just how weak he truly was. A monster? Boros echoed, uncertainty creeping into his voice. Before he could gather his wits, Ethan, Hellspout, and the sorceress vanished in a flash of light, leaving Boros alone on the ruined plain. Hell Tornado stiffened and unleashed her telekinesis, but Ethan and the others had vanished without a trace. She scoured the battlefield with wry psychic probes she had, yet there was simply nothing left to find. She muttered the word she'd heard whispered among the survivors. Savior? The name grated on her tongue. Was that the title this mysterious young hero had given himself? Hell Tornado didn't like it. She was too blunt to sugarcoat her thoughts, but she was honest to a fault. When the other S-Class heroes arrived moments later, she wasted no time sharing exactly what she'd seen and heard. News of the incident raced all the way to the Hero Association. Ethan's use of temporal reversal hadn't erased anyone's memories. They still recalled dying in those last moments, and then, inexplicably, coming back to life. Worse, the alien invaders they'd just repelled were so powerful that the Association had designated them a true god-level disaster, an existential threat to all humanity. Who is this savior? Someone asked, voice low. Yeah, what's his story? Another chimed in. The assembled heroes exchanged puzzled looks. Ethan and his companions had simply dematerialized, leaving no clue behind. Still, one conclusion was inescapable. Against overwhelming odds, the crisis had been averted. A hush fell over the group, broken only by the soft hum of dying energy fields. Finally, someone whispered, "But that was the most terrifying battle any of us have ever seen." Despite their relief, the question on everyone's lips remained the same. Who, or what, was this so-called savior? Chapter 7. The Savior's Arrival. If the savior hadn't shown up, we'd all be dead. I never thought the crisis would be this catastrophic. You heard me. At one point, I actually died. Thank goodness for our savior. I can't believe we have someone so powerful on Earth. He single-handedly crushed the most terrifying invader we've ever faced. We must track him down and make him the head of our Hero Association. Word of the savior spread like wildfire. Investors sensed opportunity, and the media splashed stories of his heroic deeds across every broadcast and front-page headline. But no one was as desperate as Chairman Shiki. The apocalypse prophesied by the seers had arrived sooner than anyone expected, and humanity had already nearly been wiped out once. In the face of annihilation, calm was impossible. This savior, Ethan, wasn't merely strong. He was a force of nature, a one-man army whose name alone sent enemies reeling. If someone of his caliber could be persuaded to join the Hero Association, it would be a game-changer. Yet he wouldn't be easy to recruit. High-profile heroes like him didn't just answer fan mail. Still, Shiki had made up his mind. He would personally find Ethan and bring him into the fold. After all, securing the savior as an official hero would not only bolster the association's ranks, but also send a clear message. Humanity had its champion, and under his leadership, no threat would ever go unanswered again. With that conviction, Chairman Shichi picked up the phone and dialed his most trusted aide. It was time to meet the man who had saved the world. The Grand Hall of the Hero Association's elite council buzzed with anxious voices. This crisis was catastrophic, one dignitary began. Had our savior not appeared, we'd all be dead. Indeed, another agreed. But who is this man? His power, He actually reversed time itself. I haven't the slightest idea, a third replied, but he rescued every last one of us. Without him, extinction was inevitable. Murmurs swept through the assembled nobles as they speculated about Ethan's origins and abilities. At length, Chairman Shiki rapped her gavel for silence. Enough, she said firmly. We narrowly escaped annihilation. That alone is testament to his strength and mercy. A hush fell. Then Shichi continued. This hero, this savior, far surpasses any S-class. He single-handedly defeated the God-class monstrosities that laid siege to us. It's clear we must honor him appropriately. She paused, letting her words resonate. I propose we elevate Ethan to the newly created rank of SS-class hero, our first and only SS-class. His deeds stand unmatched in our annals. The council members exchanged awed looks. At last, they nodded in unanimous agreement, sealing Ethan's extraordinary ascension.